Welcome to the Mind Piece. This is your space to unwind, to let the day settle, and to drift slowly into rest. Tonight we're following one of the longest and most fascinating journeys in all of nature, the quiet evolution of Homo sapiens, the story of how humans came to be. Before we begin, I'd love to know where you're listening from. The comments always show such a wonderful map of the world, with people winding down in different time zones, under different skies. If you'd like, leave a note, saying where you're watching from. And one more thing, if you enjoy these calming explorations, you might also like our new channel, The Sleepy Geographer, where we drift through the histories and cultures of countries around the world. You'll find the link in the video description. And if this calm journey helps you relax, I'd be grateful if you'd give the video a like and consider subscribing to the channel for more gentle science stories before sleep. A heartfelt thank you to those who are already subscribed. Your support keeps these long, quiet explorations possible. Now, I do hope this video isn't so interesting that it keeps you awake all night, but if it does, at least you might wake up knowing a little more about where humans came from. So, as you settle in, let's take the first step back through time and ask, what strange paths did life take before it finally shaped us? The story of Homo sapiens begins long before humans themselves. It stretches back millions of years to a time when the Earth was a very different place. Forests rose and fell, climate shifted like slow tides, and species came and went in an endless cycle of change. Evolution has no master plan, no grand design, and yet, through countless small steps, it eventually produced something we call human. To understand our evolution, we must first see ourselves as part of a wider family, the primates. Big eyes, grasping hands, and clever minds define this group. Long before Homo sapiens, there were ancestors that clung to branches, hunted in groups, and slowly learned to adapt to an ever-changing world. Each adaptation was not a leap, but a quiet step. A new way of moving, a different diet, a slightly bigger brain. What makes this story captivating is not only what we know, but also what we still don't. Fossils tell us part of the tale, scattered like puzzle pieces across Africa and beyond. Ancient DNA adds new clues, sometimes overturning what scientists thought was certain. Even now, debates continue. What exactly made us human? Was it language, art, cooperation, or something more subtle? This journey is not only about bones and tools. It is about survival in harsh landscapes, about the slow rhythm of change, and about the mysterious emergence of thought and imagination. Over the next chapters, we'll travel from forests to savas, from caves to coasts, and from the shadow of extinction to the dawn of culture. Evolution is not a ladder climbing toward perfection, but a branching tree full of dead ends, side paths, and surprising survivors. Our own species is just one of many branches. And for most of history, we shared the world with cousins who were remarkably like us. They laughed, hunted, cared for their young, and painted stories on cave walls. And yet, only one branch remains. As the night quiets around you, imagine stepping back into that ancient world. The air is different, the sounds unfamiliar, and the ground beneath your feet belongs to another time. You're about to walk the same paths our ancestors once did, tracing the fragile footprints that led slowly but surely to us. And so, the question lingers in the dark. What twists of chance and necessity shaped Homo sapiens into the beings we are today? Around 66 million years ago, when the age of the dinosaurs came to its dramatic end, the Earth entered a quieter chapter. Vast forests spread across the land, filled with a rustle of leaves and the songs of small creatures. In this new world, the stage was set for a group of mammals that would eventually give rise to us. These were the primates, and their story begins high above the ground in the safety of trees. The earliest primates were not the large, clever animals we picture today, but small nocturnal creatures, more like furry survivors of a devastated world. They lived in the shadows of the forest, darting among branches, relying on quick reflexes and sharp senses. What helped them most were their remarkable hands and feet. Unlike most mammals, they had digits capable of gripping with nails instead of claws. This gave them a delicate precision, perfect for holding on to branches and plucking fruit. Life in the treetops was full of challenges, but it also offered safety. Predators that stalk the ground had difficulty reaching them. Insects, fruits, and tender leaves were abundant food sources overhead. To thrive in this world of shifting branches and dappled light, primates developed large forward F-facing eyes. This gave them stereoscopic vision, the ability to judge depth with accuracy, which is essential when your life depends on leaping from one branch to another without missing your grip. Those big, watchful eyes also made them well suited for nighttime activity, where moonlight barely touched the forest floor. As forests flourished, so did the diversity of primates. Some were no bigger than a mouse darting about for insects. Others grew larger and began to experiment with diets rich in fruit and leaves. Their brains, though small compared to ours, were already showing signs of expansion. Navigating the complicated three-dimensional puzzle of the treetops demanded intelligence. Memory helped them remember where fruiting trees were, while social awareness guided their interactions with other primates in their group. One of the fascinating things about early primates is how their skeletons reveal a lifestyle built for agility. Flexible shoulders, grasping hands, and tails used for balance created bodies tuned for movement. These were not animals built for speed on the ground, but for precision in the trees. Each adaptation gave them an edge in a dangerous world. Even their teeth tell a story. With shapes suited for grinding fruit or piercing insects, they were versatile eaters, prepared for the changing seasons. Time in the forest was never static. The Earth's climate shifted, continents moved, and environments changed. Some primates remained small and nocturnal, their large eyes glowing in the dark. Others ventured into daylight, where colors mattered more, and their vision adapted to distinguish ripe fruit against the green canopy. This ability to tell a red fruit from an unripe green one gave them a serious survival advantage, and may be one reason why so many primates, including humans, see the world in vibrant color. Social life also began to play a role in their success. Living in groups offered protection from predators and made it easier to find food. But group living also demanded new skills. Recognizing faces, remembering social hierarchies, and cooperating with others pushed primate brains to grow more complex. The beginnings of what would one day become our deeply social nature were already being laid out in these forest communities. By around 50 million years ago, primates had spread widely. Fossils show their presence not only in Africa, but also in parts of Asia, Europe, and North America. Some lineages would vanish as climates cooled and forests receded, but others persisted, branching and diversifying. They were no longer simply survivors of the dinosaur extinction. They were thriving in their own right with traits that would echo down through time. Grasping hands, forward-facing eyes, and an ever-curious mind. Among these ancient forms, scientists identify two broad categories: the streporines, which include lemurs and lorises, and the haplorines, the ancestors of monkeys, apes, and eventually humans. Lemurs, still found today in Madagascar, preserve many features of these early primates with their long snouts and strong sense of smell. The haplohinoson, the other hand, began to emphasize vision over smell, setting the stage for the large brain primates that would follow. It is tempting to imagine these early creatures as distant prototypes Ophis, scampering through the leaves, their tiny fingers gripping branches as they scanned for danger with wide eyes. Of course, they were not miniature humans, but they carried within them the essential toolkit from which humans would eventually emerge. Each leap across a branch, each fruit plucked, and each night survived, added up over millions of years into something extraordinary. The origins of primates remind us that evolution often works not in sudden bursts, but through small, quiet steps. A slightly better grip, a keener eye, a touch more cooperation. None of these seemed world-changing at the time. Yet together, they laid the foundation for what would eventually become the human story. All of it began in the trees, where survival meant agility, perception, and a growing spark of intelligence. Even now, when you watch a monkey leap through branches or a lemur carefully pick fruit with delicate fingers, you're seeing echoes of that ancient world. They are living reminders of the path our ancestors once followed long before the first tools. long before fire, and long before anyone could have imagined something called Homo sapiens. The roots of our story are not found on the ground, but high above, where leaves whispered in the wind, and small primates carved out a future that would, in time, include us. Around 10 million years ago, the story of primates began to take a turn that would eventually set our ancestors apart. The lush forests that had sheltered early primates for millions of years were shrinking in many regions of Africa. Climate change was altering the landscape, drawing back the thick canopies and opening wide stretches of savanna and woodland. For those who lived high among the branches, the rules of survival were shifting. The trees were still there, but fewer and farther apart. To thrive, some primates had to adapt to a new way of life, one that meant spending more time on the ground. It is here that we start to see the first signs of a lineage moving toward what we would one day recognize as human. These early ancestors were not yet human and not even close in many ways, but their choices shaped by their environment placed them on a separate path. While some primates remained firmly in the treetops, others began to explore the spaces between. They walked at first, awkwardly across open grass, scavenging, foraging, and learning to live where cover was scarce. The divergence between the ancestors of modern apes and the ancestors of humans was not a sudden event. It was a slow branching like the fork of a tree. Genetic studies suggest that the split between our lineage and that of the chimpanzees occurred around 6 to 7 million years ago. At that point, there were likely many species of ape-like creatures scattered across Africa, experimenting in an evolutionary sense with different ways of surviving. Only some of these experiments would last. One of the earliest known candidates for this new direction is Sahelanthropus chadensis. Discovered in Chad and dated to about 7 million years ago, this species had a mixture of features, a face and small canine teeth that looked more human-like, but a small brain size closer to that of apes. Crucially, the placement of the hole where the spinal cord entered the skull suggested an upright posture, hinting at bipedalism, or at least something close to it. Standing upright would become one of the hallmarks of the human line. And here we see the beginnings of that story. Following Sahelanthropus came other intriguing finds. Arurin tucanis from Kenya lived about 6 million years ago and shows evidence of climbing, but also of moving upright on 2 legs. Then came Odopicus, known from Ethiopia, living around 412 to 4 million years ago. Arapithecus was a fascinating blend feet with an opposable big toe for climbing trees, but pelvis and leg structures that suggested it could walk on the ground in a bipedal fashion. It was a creature balanced between 2 worlds, the forest canopy and the open spaces, and it shows just how gradual the shift toward our form of movement really was. The African environment during this time played a critical role. Expanding savas, shrinking forests, and fluctuating climates meant that flexibility was the greatest survival tool. Walking on 2 legs allowed early hominins to cover greater distances efficiently, to spot predators over tall grass, and to carry food or tools. It was not an instant advantage, but rather a slow accumulation of benefits. A primate that could balance on 2 legs while carrying fruit back to safety had a better chance of survival. And over time, these advantages shaped the body itself. But walking upright was not the only feature setting these creatures apart. Dentition tells its own story. Compared to apes, early hominins had smaller canine teeth and thicker enamel. Adaptations suited for a varied diet that included hard fruits, seeds, and roots. This dietary flexibility was essential in unpredictable environments. In a sense, they were becoming generalists capable of making use of whatever the land offered. Social life, too, was evolving. Living in groups meant more eyes to spot danger on the open savanna. Cooperation became increasingly valuable, as did communication. While these early hominins did not have language as we know it, they likely had complex vocalizations and gestures. Over time, the pressures of group living would push brains to grow, but even at this stage, the seeds of social intelligence were present. The divergence of lineages is a reminder that our story could have turned out very differently. While our ancestors were testing out upright walking, other primates were perfecting life in the trees. The ancestors of modern chimpanzees, gorillas, and orangutans remained in environments where climbing, strength, and canopy living were the best survival strategies. There was nothing inevitable about the human path. It was simply one of many, a narrow branch that continued while others flourished in different directions. Fossils are rare from this deep past, and every new discovery reshapes the picture. A single jawbone or fragment of pelvis can tell us volumes about posture, diet, and daily life. What emerges is not a straight line of progress, but a branching bush of species, some of which lasted millions of years before vanishing. The human lineage was never alone. It was always part of a broader prime family, each member adapted to its own niche. By about 4 million years ago, the Australopithecines had appeared descendants of these first experiments in bipedalism. They carried forward the combination of upright walking, tree climbing, and varied diets, and they flourished across much of Africa. Though they come later in the timeline, their presence shows that the shift begun by species like Ardipithecus had taken root. The ground was no longer a place of occasional danger, but a home, a landscape where survival depended on both adaptability and innovation. The first steps toward us were not giant leaps, but careful, uncertain moves shaped by landscapes that were constantly changing. From dense forest to open savanna, from tree climbing to tentative walking, these early hominins reveal how environment and anatomy work together. They were neither apes in the modern sense, nor humans, but something in between. Beings learning to balance between two worlds, carrying within their bones the potential for everything that would come after. Their story is a reminder that evolution is rarely dramatic in the moment. It is a long chain of small adaptations, each one making survival a little easier in a changing world. In the quiet of ancient Africa, as forests gave way to open plains, the first true steps toward humanity were being taken. Those steps echoed into the future, setting the course for a lineage that would one day look back and wonder where it all began. Around 3.5 million years ago, in the heart of Africa, the landscape was a patchwork of open grasslands, scattered woodlands, and winding rivers. Herds of antelope grazed in the tall grasses. Lions prowled the edges of the plains, and towering birds like ostriches darted across the horizon. Among this bustling scene of predators and prey, a small group of upright walkers made their way across the savanna. These were Theopithecines, and though they were not yet human, they carried within them traits that would one day define us. Perhaps the most famous member of this lineage is Lucy, discovered in Ethiopia in 1974. Her scientific name is Australopithecus afarensis, and she lived around 3.2 million years ago. Lucy was small, standing just over a meter tall, but her bones revealed something extraordinary. She walked upright. Her pelvis and leg bones showed adaptations for bipedal locomotion, a hallmark of the human lineage. Yet she was no long-distance jogger. Her stride was more of a steady shuffle, efficient enough for survival, but not built for speed. Bipedalism was both a gift and a gamble. Walking on two legs freed the hands for carrying food, infants, or even sticks and stones that might serve as rudimentary tools. It also allowed Australopithecines to stand tall in the savanna, scanning the horizon for predators. But the advantages came with costs. Their bodies were still transitioning from tree-dwelling ancestors, and the spine, pelvis, and legs were under new stresses. Back pain, sore knees, and awkward balance were likely everyday companions. Evolution rarely hands out benefits without a price tag. The anatomy of Australopithecus reveals this balancing act. Their feet had arches for walking, but their toes retained some grasping ability, useful for climbing trees when needed. Their arms were long relative to their bodies, suggesting that while they were committed to walking upright, they still spent plenty of time among the branches. This dual lifestyle made sense. Trees offered safety at night, while the open ground provided access to new sources of food during the day. Diet is another key piece of the Australopithecus puzzle. Their teeth and jaws suggest they ate a wide variety of foods from fruits and leaves to roots and nuts. Their thick enamel and strong chewing muscles were well suited for grinding tough vegetation, especially in dry seasons when softer foods were scarce. Being generalist gave them resilience and shifting climates. They could survive both in lush woodlands and in harsher, drier conditions, making them well adapted to the ever-changing African landscape. The fossil record gives us glimpses of their daily lives. In Lati, Tanzania, a remarkable set of footprints dating back over 3.5 million years preserves the steps of Australopithecines walking across damp volcanic ash. These prints, hardened and fossilized by time, show a clear pattern of bipedal walking. You can almost picture a small group, perhaps a family, crossing the open plain together, leaving behind evidence of one of the most defining transitions in evolutionary history. Though their brains were still relatively small, about a third the size of a modern human brain, Australopithecines were intelligent enough to navigate complex social lives. Group living meant sharing resources and watching for danger, but also competing for mates and food. Social dynamics likely revolved around cooperation as much as rivalry, with communication through gestures, calls, and facial expressions. While they lacked language as we know it, their interactions were rich with meaning, the foundation of what would one day grow into human sociality. The risks of walking upright should not be understated. On the open savanna, Australopithecines were slower than many predators and lacked sharp claws or massive teeth for defense. Their safety depended on awareness, group vigilance, and the ability to retreat to trees when threatened. Being bipedal made them visible from a distance, which was useful for spotting others, but it also meant they were visible to hungry eyes. Survival was a delicate balance between caution and exploration. Yet, despite the dangers, pedalism persisted. The efficiency of walking on two legs in open terrain proved to be a long-term success. Over generations, natural selection reinforced this way of moving, gradually reshaping the hips, knees, and spine to handle the stresses of upright locomotion more effectively. What began as a compromise between climbing and walking would over time become the defining trait of the human line. Australopithecines were not confined to a single region. Fossils have been found across eastern and southern Africa, showing that they thrived in a variety of environments. Each discovery adds more texture to the story. Different species within the genus Australopithecus, each experimenting with slightly different body shapes and survival strategies. Some leaned more heavily on climbing, while others showed stronger adaptations for ground walking. It was a diverse and adaptable group, a reminder that evolution is never about one straight path, but about many branches. One striking feature of Australopithecus show much their faces still resembled apes. They had pronounced brow ridges, flat noses, and protruding jaws. Yet in their bones, you can see the slow shift toward a more human-like profile. Smaller canines suggested less reliance on displays of aggression, while the forward placement of the spine hinted at more refined posture. Piece by piece, trait by trait, they were moving further away from their ape relatives. Lucy herself offers a vivid connection to this time. When her skeleton was unearthed, researchers realized just how complete she was compared to most fossils. Her curved fingers spoke of climbing, while a pelvis told of upright walking. Holding her reconstructed bones, scientists could see the very crossroads of evolution in one individual. Lucy was not unique in her species, but she became a symbol of that transitional world, bridging the gap between the trees and the open plains. What makes the Australopithecines so remarkable is not that they were fully humanoid, but that they embodied the balance of old and new. They were walkers of the savannah, yet climbers of trees. They carried the ancient toolkit of primates while testing the new opportunities of upright life. Their small brains limited them, but their adaptability gave them resilience. In many ways, they were survivors in a challenging world, making the most of both the ground and the canopy. Their legacy lies in the simple, steady act of walking. Each step they took across the savannah was an evolutionary gamble that ultimately paid off. They did not know that their footprints would endure for millions of years, or that their bones would one day tell their story. But in walking upright, In carrying their lives across open plains, they set in motion a chain of events that would change the course of primate history. Their steps may have been small, but they echoed far into the future, shaping the beings who would one day look back and call them kin. Around 2.5 million years ago, in the shifting landscapes of East Africa, a remarkable change began: townfold. Among the rolling savas and scattered woodlands lived a small, relatively unassuming species known today as Homo habilis. Their name means handyman, a title given not because they were master builders or engineers, but because they left behind some of the earliest known stone tools. These tools, simple though they might appear to us now, represented a profound leap in intelligence and culture. With chipped rocks and broken flakes, the dawn of technology had arrived. The older one tools, as they called, were not polished or finely crafted. They were crude, made by striking one stone against another to produce a sharp edge. Yet that sharp edge was revolutionary. With it, Homo habilis could cut meat from carcasses, slice through plant material, and break open bones to access the rich marrow inside. What had once been a discarded skeleton left by predators became a valuable resource. This ability transformed survival, giving early humans access to a new level of nutrition that fed both body and brain. What made these tools significant was not just their utility, but the thought behind them. To make a stone tool required Pharaoh had to recognize that a particular rock could be struck in a way that produced a useful fragment. It required more than strength. It demanded planning and an understanding of cause and effect. This was not an instinctual action like a bird building a nest. It was a deliberate act, a sign that abstract thinking was beginning to take shape. Homo habilis itself was a fascinating species. Standing about 1 and 1.2 m tall with long arms and relatively small bodies, they were still very much transitional creatures. Their brains, though modest by modern standards, averaged around 600 symmetry, larger than their Australopithecine predecessors, and significantly more complex. Fossil skulls reveal a shape hinting at regions of the brain associated with planning and motor control. These were the neurological foundations for tool-making. The use of tools also reshaped social life. Imagine a small group of Homo habilis gathered around a carcass. Some individuals may have worked together to process meat, sharing their words of their efforts. Others may have watched and learned, copying the techniques of the skilled. For the first time, knowledge could be passed on not only through instinct, but through demonstration. Tool-making created a culture of learning, a continuity across generations that would become one of the hallmarks of humanity. Evidence from archaeological sites supports this idea. Clusters of stone flakes and animal bones suggest repeated use of particular locations, almost like early workstations. These places may have been hubs where groups gathered, processed food, and perhaps even shared social bonds. It is tempting to picture the beginnings of tradition here, the idea that certain stones worked best, or that particular areas were good for butchering. These choices laid the groundwork for shared practices, tiny sparks of culture taking root. One of the fascinating aspects of the older one toolkit is how versatile it was. A single core stone could be shaped to create flakes with sharp edges, which could then be used for cutting. The core itself, with its rough shape, could serve as a hammer or scraper. This adaptability speaks to a level of ingenuity. Even if the tools look simple to us, they represented an understanding of multifunctionality, an ability to see beyond the immediate shape of a rock to its potential uses. The impact of these tools on diet cannot be overstated. Before this innovation, early humans relied heavily on fruits, plants, and what small prey they could catch. With sharp-edged stones, they could scavenge from large animals left behind by lions or hyenas. The access to meat and especially toe bone marrow provided dense calories and essential nutrients. This dietary shift may have fueled brain growth, creating a feedback loop. Better tools allowed for better food, which supported larger brains, which, in turn, enabled more complex tools. Of course, tool making did not erase risk. Homo habilis was still small and vulnerable compared to predators. A lion could not care less about your carefully crafted stone flake. Survival demanded vigilance. But tools added an edge, quite literally, that allowed these early humans to compete in a dangerous ecosystem. With stone in hand, even the leftovers of a predator's feast became an opportunity rather than a dead end. The archaeological record shows that tooling was not uniform. Some tools were more carefully made than others, suggesting differences in skill. This raises intriguing questions. Did individuals specialize? Were there early teachers among them passing down their craft? While we may never know the details, the very possibility hints at a social complexity beyond that of other primates. Comparisons with modern chimpanzees help illustrate just how significant this leap was. Chimpanzees use tools too. Sticks to fish for termites, stones to crack nuts, but they do not systematically produce sharp-edged tools. The deliberate shaping of rock into something more than it was is uniquely human. With Homo habilis, this cognitive divide began to widen. The Aldon tradition lasted for hundreds of thousands of years. To modernize, this might seem stagnant, the same chipped stones over and over. But that endurance is a testament to their success. These tools worked. They were effective enough to sustain countless generations, each one born into a world where sharp stones meant survival. Culture, in its simplest form, had begun to endure beyond the individual. It is worth remembering that for Homo habilis, making tools was not about progress or innovation in the way we think of it today. It was about immediate survival, yet unknowingly, they were laying the foundations for something much greater. The act of shaping stone into a tool was the beginning of a long trajectory that would one day lead to art, architecture, and spacecraft. All of it, in a way, began with that first sharp edge struck from a rock. Homo habilis may not have been the grand inventors of history, but their legacy is undeniable. With their tools, they carved open a new chapter in evolution, one where intelligence, culture, and creativity mattered just as much as strength or speed. Their world was harsh, filled with predators and uncertainty, but they faced it with stones in their hands and ideas in their minds. In those small flakes of rock lies the first evidence of a mind that looked at the world and imagined not just what it was, but what it could become. Around 1.9 million years ago, a new figure appeared on the African landscape. Taller, stronger, and more adventurous than those who came before. This species would become one of the longest living members of the human family. Known as Homo erectus, or upright man, they were the first true global travelers, the pioneers who stepped beyond Africa and carried the story of humanity into new lands. With them came not only physical endurance, but also the beginnings of mastery over one of nature's most powerful forces, fire. Fossil evidence shows that Homo erectus had a body strikingly similar to ours. They were the first of our ancestors to reach modern human proportions, with longer legs, shorter arms, and a rib cage that gave them a more athletic frame. Standing up to nearly 2 meters tall in some cases, they looked far more like us than any of the Menians before them. Their anatomy was built for walking long distances, and more than that, for running. Endurance running may sound like an odd survival strategy, but it was a brilliant adaptation. While many animals can sprint faster than humans, few can maintain speed for long. Homo erectus, with their springy Achilles tendons, arched feet, and sweat glands covering their skin, were specialists in persistence hunting. By jogging steadily under the hot sun, they could pursue prey over hours until the exhausted animal collapsed from heat and fatigue. It was not dramatic like the chase of a lion, but it was effective. In the slow rhythm of pursuit, Homo erectus found a new way to dominate the landscape. Their brains were larger than those of Homo habilis, averaging around 900 centimeters, and their skulls showed signs of increased complexity in the areas associated with planning and coordination. They were capable of shaping more sophisticated tools than their predecessors, moving beyond the simple flakes of the Aldoan tradition. The Orlean hand axes, with their teardrop shapes and carefully crafted edges, became their hallmark. These tools were symmetrical, multi-purpose, and made with a level of planning that suggests a keen eye and steady hands. With hand axes, Homo erectus could butcher meat, scrape hides, dig roots, and even shape wood. But perhaps the most transformative step taken by Homo erectus was their relationship with fire. The evidence is debated, but sites in Kenya, Israel, and China suggest that controlled use of fire began at least 800,000 years ago, and possibly even earlier. If true, it means that Homo erectus was the first to tame the flickering flames that had long terrified other animals. Fire brought warmth during cold nights, protection against predators, and a gathering place for social life. Most importantly, fire allowed for cooking. By roasting roots and meat, Homo erectus could unlock more calories and nutrients from food, making digestion easier and supporting further brain growth. In many ways, fire became their greatest tool. A natural force turned into a partner. Their wanderlust is equally remarkable. Fossils of Homo erectus have been found across Africa, the Middle East, Asia, and as far as Indonesia. They were the first hominin to break free from the boundaries of the continent where humans originated. This expansion was not the work of a few isolated individuals, but a sustained migration that lasted hundreds of thousands of years. Their adaptability was astonishing. They thrived in tropical forests, open savannas, and temperate woodlands, adjusting their diets and tools to fit each new environment. The presence of Homo erectus across such vast distances tells us something important about their social lives. Traveling in groups would have been essential both for protection and for cooperation, in hunting and foraging. Communication, though not yet the structured language of modern humans, was likely more advanced than in earlier species. Vocal calls, gestures, and perhaps even protos may have been part of their world, binding communities together as they spread across continents. The endurance of Homo erectus as a species is also remarkable. They survived for nearly 2 million years, far longer than our own species has yet existed. In that time, they weathered dramatic shifts in climate from warm interglacials to harsh ice ages. Their success lay not in specialization, but in flexibility. With tools in hand, fire at their side, and bodies built for distance, they were equipped to survive in places that would have defeated less adaptable creatures. Despite their resilience, life for Homo erectus was still far from easy. Predators remained a constant threat. Disease lurked in every environment, and the challenges of raising offspring demanded cooperation. Yet they endured. Their bones scattered across the old world speak of a species that was not just surviving, but thriving. They were not confined to one corner of Africa. They were explorers carving out a presence in lands where no human-like creature had walked before. One of the fascinating aspects of Homo erectus is how much variation there was across their vast range. Populations in Africa, Asia, and Europe developed slightly different traits, reflecting the pressures of their locale environments. Some had thicker skulls, others broader bodies, and still others adapted to colder climates. Yet across this diversity, the core identity of Homo erectus remained. Upright tool using travelers who carried fire in their wake. The story of Homo erectus also reminds us that evolution is not always about sudden leaps forward. Their tools changed slowly over hundreds of thousands of years. They were not racing toward innovation, but instead perfecting what worked. Aurelian hand axes remained relatively unchanged for over 1 million years, a testament to their effectiveness. If a design is reliable, there is little reason to reinvent it. Fire, travel, endurance, and adaptability. These were the gifts of Homo erectus. They did not write, paint, or build great monuments, but they did something perhaps more profound. They left Africa, mastered fire, and shaped their bodies into forms that echo through us today. When we walk long distances, when we gather around a fire, or when we run under the sun, we are carrying forward the legacy of Homo erectus. Though they eventually disappeared, their influence never truly vanished. They were our ancestors, our teachers in endurance and exploration. Their wanderlust opened the map of the world to humanity, and their sparks of fire lit the first human hearths. Homo erectus was more than upright man. They were the restless travelers who took the first great steps toward the global species we have become. In their footprints stretching across continents, we can still trace the beginning of humanity's long journey outward. Around 1.8 million years ago, a bold chapter in the human story began to unfold. For the first time, our ancestors stepped beyond Africa, venturing into unfamiliar lands that stretched across vast distances. The pioneers of this journey were Homo erectus, those upright walkers whose endurance, adaptability, and curiosity carried them far from the place of their origins. What followed was a slow but momentous spread into Asia, a migration that would reshape not just their own destiny, but the map of human evolution. Fossil evidence paints a vivid picture of this first great expansion. One of the earliest discoveries came from Dimane, Georgia, where skulls and bones dated to about 1.8 million years ago revealed a small population of Homo erectus living far beyond Africa. These individuals were shorter and had smaller brains than later Homo erectus, yet they were unmistakably part of the same adventurous lineage. Their presence shows that the leap out of Africa was not a sudden dash, but rather a gradual push, with small groups testing new environments, sometimes clinging on, sometimes fading away. From the Caucasus, Homo erectus spread further east. Fossils found in Indonesia, particularly on the island of Java, show that by around 1.6 million years ago, they had reached the farthest edges of Southeast Asia. Imagine the resilience required for such a journey. Across deserts, through forests, along river valleys, and eventually onto islands, these ancient humans persisted. They were not guided by maps or intentions of conquest. They simply followed the pull of survival, the search for food, water, and safer places to raise their young. Adapting to new climates was one of their greatest achievements. In Africa, Homo erectus had faced hot savas and shifting dry seasons. But outside Africa, they encountered freezing winters, monsoon rains, and dense forests. Their survival depended on flexibility. In colder regions, fire became not just useful, but essential. The warmth off flames allowed them to sleep through icy nights, to cook food that might otherwise have been indigestible, and to keep predators at bay. In tropical forests, they relied on sharp-edged tools to cut through thick vegetation and to process the diverse foods available. Each environment demanded something different, and Homo erectus, though not armed with complex technology, met those challenges with persistence and ingenuity. One of the striking aspects of this expansion is how small the groups must have been. Early migrations likely involved just a handful of families moving together, establishing themselves in new areas and slowly growing in number. Such small populations would have been vulnerable to disease, famine, or predation. Many groups probably vanished, leaving no trace. Yet enough endured that fossils now appear scattered across Asia, each one a footprint of survival against the odds. The remains of Homo erectus in different parts of Asia show subtle variations shaped by isolation and local conditions. In Indonesia, the so-called Java man fossils reveal thick skulls and strong bones adapted perhaps to a rugged lifestyle. In China, at Jogja near Beijing, the famous being man fossil stele of a population living in caves, making tools and possibly controlling fire nearly 700,000 years ago. These sites give us more than bones. They give us glimpses of lives lived on the edge of survival, sustained by intelligence and adaptability. Their diet, too, shifted with each new landscape. On the open steppes, large herbivores provided meat, while in forests, roots, nuts, and smaller animals became staples. The ability to exploit varied resources was one of their strengths. Archaeological sites show bones with cut marks, evidence of butchery, and tools scattered nearby, testimony to their skill in making the most of what the land provided. This dietary flexibility likely helped Homo erectus persist in regions where less adaptable species might have failed. Though their brains were smaller than ours, averaging about 900 cm, they were large enough to support complex behavior. The Achillean hand axe remained their versatile companion, a tool that could serve as knife, hammer, and scraper. Its wide distribution across Africa, Europe, and Asia shows how fundamental it was to their way of life. And yet, despite the spread, Homo erectus populations often remained small and isolated. For hundreds of thousands of years, they were scattered communities, separated by geography and climate, surviving in pockets where conditions allowed. Their persistence is remarkable. In places like Java, Homo erectus may have survived until as recently as 100,000 years ago, overlapping with the rise of modern humans. That means their story spanned nearly 2 million years, a longevity few species can match. The key to that success lay in their ability to endure in small, resilient populations. They did not need vast numbers to leave an impact. They needed only determination, adaptability, and the spark of firelight to keep them going. What drove them to leave Africa in the first place? The answer is likely a mix of curiosity and necessity. As populations grew, resources may have become scarce, pushing groups to wander farther in search of food and water. Changing climates may have opened corridors of grassland and forest, making travel easier. And perhaps there was simply an instinct to move, to explore new horizons, a restlessness that echoes in our own species, even today. The journey of Homo erectus into Asia was not the march of conquerors, but the slow spread of survivors. Each step carried risks, yet also opportunities. They crossed rivers, climbed mountains, and faced predators unlike any they had known before. And in doing so, they showed that humans, all the beings who would one day become humans, were not bound to one land. They could adapt, endure, and thrive across the world. Their migration out of Africa marked a turning point in the human saga. It proved that our lineage was not tied to a single environment, that survival was possible in deserts, forests, plains, and caves. It showed that endurance, cooperation, and a few simple tools could carry a species farther than instinct alone. Homo erectus may not have known they were explorers, but in their footsteps lies the first great journey of humanity. It was a journey that stretched from the Savas of Africa to the distant islands of Indonesia. A journey measured not in maps or miles, but in survival itself. The spread of Homo erectus reminds us that the story of humanity was never confined to one place. It began with small groups stepping into the unknown, carrying only their wits, their tools, and their resilience. Those quiet wanderers lit the path that countless generations would follow, leaving Africa behind, but carrying Africa within them wherever they went. Their legacy is written not in monuments or cities, but in their sheer persistence, in the fact that against all odds they endured. When the winds of the Ice Age swept across Europe and Western Asia, another kind of human was already there, thriving in the harsh cold and the rugged landscapes. These were the Neanderthals, a species so close to us that traces of them remain in our DNA today, stocky, powerful, and intelligent. They were our cousins, living parallel lives for hundreds of thousands of years before their eventual disappearance. For a long time, they were portrayed as brutish cavemen. But modern science paints a far richer picture, one of resilience, culture, and sophistication. The strength of the Neanderthals was immediately apparent in their bones. Their skeletons reveal short, robust frames with broad rib cages and thick limbs. Adapted to cold climates, their bodies conserved heat better than those of modern humans. They were immensely muscular, with gripping hands and strong shoulders. Archaeological evidence suggests they hunted massive animals such as woolly mammoths, bison, and rhinoceroses. Doing so required not only raw power, but also teamwork and strategy. These were not reckless charges into danger, but coordinated hunts carried out with spears and planning. Injuries seen in their bones resembled those of rodeo riders, suggesting the risks of close encounters with large animals. Their hunting strategies were diverse. In wooded regions, they used ambush techniques, hiding and waiting for prey to pass. In open terrain, they worked in groups to drive animals into natural traps like ravines or marshes. This level of organization implies communication and social coordination. They understood the land, the habits of animals, and the value of cooperation. Hunting was not simply survival. It was a skill passed down and shared. evidence of a culture rooted in knowledge of the environment. Beyond strength, Neanderthals also displayed a surprising depth of intelligence. Their brains were on average slightly larger than those of modern humans, though differently shaped. The size of the brain does not directly measure intelligence, but their capabilities are clear from what they left behind. They created sophisticated stone tools, more advanced than the simple flakes of earlier humans. These so-called must-isterian tools included scrapers, awls, and points crafted with care and often specialized for particular tasks. They also used organic materials like bone and wood, though these rarely survive in the archaeological record. Culture among the Neanderthals extended beyond tools and hunting. Evidence shows they cared for their sick and injured. Fossil remains have been found of individuals who lived long after, sustaining crippling injuries, meaning others must have looked after them. This compassion, the willingness to care for those who could not contribute directly to survival, speaks volumes about their social bonds. They were not merely surviving machines. They were communities bound by empathy and connection. Perhaps most intriguing are the signs of symbolic behavior. At sites in Spain and France, archaeologists have uncovered pigments, carved objects, and even possible jewelry made from animal teeth or shells. One cave in Spain contains red ochre markings that are at least 65,000 years old, predating the arrival of modern humans in the region. This suggests that Neanderthals engaged in symbolic or artistic expression once thought to be uniquely human. The lines, dots, and handprints may not have been art as we define it, but they were meaningful gestures, signs of abstract thought. Burial practices also provide insight into their minds. Several Neanderthal sites show deliberate burials, with bodies placed carefully in graves. In some cases, traces of pollen hint that flowers may have been laid with the dead, though this interpretation is debated. Whether or not they decorated graves, the act of burying itself reflects an awareness of death and a respect for the individual. These practices suggest ritual, memory, and perhaps even belief. They hint that Neanderthals contemplated life beyond survival, venturing into the realm of meaning and spirituality. Fire was another central part of their lives. Hearths found at sites across Europe show that they regularly used fire for warmth, cooking, and protection. They may even have understood how to manage flames over long periods. Cooked food would have been easier to chew and digest, giving them more energy and broadening their dietary options. Fire also created social spaces, gathering points where knowledge and stories could be shared. In the flickering glow, Neanderthals may have bonded, just as humans still do around campfires today. Interactions with the natural world shaped their culture as much as their tools did. They lived in caves and rock shelters, adapting their surroundings for comfort and protection. Some researchers suggest they may have used animal hides as clothing stitched together with the help of bones. This resourcefulness allowed them to endure the brutal winters of Ice Age Europe, where temperatures could plummet and survival required ingenuity as much as muscle. For all their resilience, Neanderthals were not isolated. Genetic studies reveal that they interbred with early Homo sapiens when our ancestors moved into their territories. Today, most people of non-African descent carry between 1% and 2% Neanderthal DNA. These inherited fragments influence everything from immune system responses to skin and hair traits. Far from being a separate forgotten species, Neanderthals left a living legacy woven into our very biology. Yet their story also has a poignant ending. Around 40,000 years ago, they vanished from the fossil record. The reasons remain debated. Climate change may have reduced their habitats and food sources. Competition with modern humans who brought new technologies and larger social networks could have been another factor. Small, scattered Neanderthal populations may simply have dwindled over time, unable to maintain their numbers in the face of mounting pressures. Their disappearance was not sudden, but gradual, the fading of a resilient species that had thrived for hundreds of thousands of years. What remains of the Neanderthals is not a tale of failure, but of remarkable survival. For more than 300,000 years, They endured some of the harshest climates Earth has seen. They hunted giants, cared for one another, and left signs of a culture that still challenges our assumptions about what it means to be human. They were strong, yes, but they were also thoughtful, creative, and compassionate. When we look at the evidence, the tools, the hearths, the graves, and the genetic traces within ourselves, we see not a crude cousin, but a fellow human species. They remind us that intelligence takes many forms, and that culture is not the sole domain of Homo sapiens. In the icy caves of Europe, Neanderthals built lives full of struggle, community, and meaning. Their story is not separate from ours. It is part of the long branching tale of humanity, one that still lingers in our blood, and in the echoes of the Ice Age, winds they once called home. High in the Alai Mountains of Siberia lies a cave that has become one of the most extraordinary sights in the study of human evolution. At first glance, Denisova Cave seems unremarkable, just a rocky shelter tucked into the landscape, a place where ancient peoples might have taken refuge from the cold. Yet from its soil and bones, scientists uncovered evidence of a human lineage so mysterious that it has rewritten our understanding of our family tree. These are the Denisovans, a group we know not from complete skeletons or elaborate artifacts, but from fragments and DNA that whisper of their existence. The story began in 2008, when researchers discovered a small finger bone in the cave. At first, it seemed like just another fossil from the long timeline of hominins. But when scientists extracted and sequenced its DNA, the results were shocking. It did not match Neanderthals or modern humans. Instead, it revealed a previously unknown branch of the human family tree. Suddenly, a ghost lineage had stepped out of the shadows, one that had lived alongside us for tens of thousands of years, yet left barely a trace in the archaeological record. Unlike the Neanderthals, whose remains are scattered across Europe and Asia, Denisovan fossils are incredibly sparse. A few teeth, a jawbone found in Tibet, and fragments of bone from Denisova Cave are all we have. These remains are not enough to reconstruct their full appearance. Were they robust like Neanderthals, slender like early Homo sapiens, or something in between? No one can say for certain. The little evidence available suggests they were large-bodied with massive teeth that dwarfed those of other humans. But beyond that, their physical form remains largely a mystery. Where the fossils fail, genetics fills in the picture. DNA extracted from Denisovan remains has been compared with that of modern humans, and their results are astonishing. Populations today in Melanesia, Australia, Papua New Guinea, and parts of East and Southeast Asia carry traces of Denisovan DNA, sometimes as much as 5%. This means that as Homo sapiens spread into Asia, they met and interbred with Denisovans just as they did with Neanderthals. Far from being isolated, Denisovans were part of the wider human story, interacting, mixing, and leaving behind genetic legacies that endure to this day. One of the most striking examples of this legacy is found in the people of Tibet. High in the Himalayas, life exists in thin air, where oxygen levels are far lower than at sea level. Modern Tibetans have a genetic adaptation that allows their blood to carry oxygen efficiently without thickening dangerously. This trait comes directly from Denisovan DNA. In other words, the survival of humans in some of the harshest environments on Earth was made possible by ancient interbreeding with a species we barely even know. Without Denisovans, the story of humanity on the roof of the world might have been very different. The question of where Denisovans lived remains open. Their genetic signature is strongest in populations from Oceania and parts of Asia, suggesting they ranged widely across the continent. Some scientists believe there may have been multiple Denisovan populations, each adapting to local conditions. The jawbone from Tibet supports this idea, showing they could thrive in extreme altitudes. Others may have lived in Southeast Asia, perhaps honestlands that were connected to the mainland when sea levels were lower. Their range may have stretched thousands of kilometers, making them one of the most widespread human relatives. What makes the Denis so fascinating is how much we don't know. Their stone tools are poorly understood, and their cultural practices remain hidden. Did they bury their dead? Did they create art or symbols like Neanderthals and early Homo sapiens? The cave that bears their name contains artifacts, but it was also used by Neanderthals and modern humans at different times, making it difficult to assign objects definitively to the Denisovans. The result is a tantalizing silence, a reminder that not all chapters of human history are equally well preserved. Yet, despite the scarcity of physical evidence, the genetic record shows that Denisovans were not obscure in their time. Their DNA flows in millions of people today, quietly shaping traits and abilities. Studies suggest Denisovan genes influence immune systems, helping populations adapt to local diseases. Other fragments may play roles in how bodies process fat or respond to sunlight. Though we cannot see their faces or reconstruct their culture fully, their influence is woven into our biology. In this sense, they live on as more than fossils. They live on in the cells of modern humans. The discovery of Denisovans also highlights the complexity of human evolution. For much of the 20th century, the story of human origins was told as a linear tale, with one species replacing another in neat succession. Denisovans, along with Neanderthals and other ancient relatives, reveal a very different picture. Our history was not a simple ladder, but a tangled web full of overlapping populations, interbreeding and shared survival. We were never alone. We were part of a family of humans, diverse and interconnected. As techniques improve, more secrets of the Denis may yet be revealed. Advances in DNA extraction allow scientists to pull genetic material, even from cave sediments, where no bones remain. Already, traces of Denis DNA have been detected in soils, hinting at their presence even where fossils are absent. Each discovery adds a little more to the mosaic, piece by piece, illuminating the shadows of this enigmatic species. It is humbling to think that such an influential branch of humanity is known mainly from a handful of fragments. Achild's finger, bone, a few teeth, and a jaw from Tibet. That is almost all the physical evidence we have. And yet from these small pieces a vast story emerges, a story of survival across Asia, of encounters with our ancestors, and of gifts passed down through genes that helped shape who we are today. The Denisovans remind us that the human story is full of hidden chapters. Not every ancestor left behind cave paintings or monumental bones. Some left their legacy more quietly in the double helix of DNA, waiting to be uncovered by science tens of thousands of years later. They were mysterious in life, and they remain mysterious in death. But in the soft echo of their genes, in the endurance of their adaptations, they continue to walk beside us, unseen yet present. Theirs is a legacy that whispers rather than shouts, but it is no less profound for its quietness. Around 300,000 years ago, deep in the African landscape, a new kind of human began to emerge. Fossils from places like Jebel Herd in Morocco and Omoish in Ethiopia reveal the earliest known examples of Homo sapiens. These individuals were not exactly like us, but their features were unmistakably closer to the modern human form than anything that had come before. With their appearance, the long evolutionary path that had been winding its way through forests, savas, and ice ages finally produced a species that would leave a permanent mark on the Earth. The skulls from this time tell much of the story. Earlier hominins like Homo, erectus had long, low crania with thick brow ridges and projecting faces. The early Homo sapiens fossils show something different. Their skulls were shorter from front to back with a rounder shape and reduced brow ridges. Most striking was the size and organization of their brains, averaging around 1,300 to 500 centimeters. These brains were not just larger than those of earlier species, but also reorganized. The frontal regions associated with decision planning, and complex thought were expanded, giving Homo sapiens an edge in flexibility and creativity. But these early humans did not arrive fully formed. The fossils show a mixture of traits with some faces still jutting forward, and skulls not quite as globular as ours. Evolution is rarely abrupt. It works gradually, blending features over generations. What we see in these early sapiens is the transitional stage of a species in the making, already on its way toward what we recognize in the mirror, but still carrying echoes of its ancestors. The environment in Africa at this time was both a challenge and a crucible. Shifting climates brought alternating cycles of lush green landscapes and arid deserts. Rainfall patterns changed dramatically, opening corridors for migration and then closing them again. For populations of early Homo sapiens, survival meant adaptability. They had to endure periods when food was plentiful and times when resources were scarce. This instability likely pushed the evolution of intelligence and flexibility, as those who could innovate were more likely to survive. Archaeological sites from this period provide tantalizing glimpses of behavior. Alongside fossil remains, tools reveal the growing sophistication of early sapiens. Stone flakes became more refined with evidence of prepared core techniques that allowed greater control over shape and size. These were not random chips, but carefully planned tools crafted with an understanding of geometry and foresight. Some sites also show the use of pigments like ochre, possibly for symbolic purposes, though their exact meaning is debated. If true, this suggests that the stirrings of symbolic thought, the ability to attach meaning beyond pure utility, were already taking shape. Social life was another crucial factor in their rise. Homo sapiens likely lived in small, mobile groups, cooperating in hunting and foraging. Their survival would have depended on sharing knowledge, dividing labor, and maintaining bonds within the group. With larger brains came more complex forms of communication, perhaps proto-language or richly varied vocalizations. This allowed them to coordinate hunts, teach tool-making, and pass on traditions. In the campfires and conversations of these early communities lay the seeds of language, culture, and identity. The emergence of Homo sapiens was not a single event in one place, but a process occurring across Africa. Different populations contributed to the mix, creating a species shaped by a mosaic of evolutionary pressures. This Pan-African origin highlights the interconnectedness of early groups. Rather than one isolated cradle of humanity, there were many, each adding threads to the tapestry that became modern humans. The brain expansion of Homo sapiens was more than just a matter of size. It transformed the way they interacted with their world. Larger reorganized brains supported memory, problem-solving, and imagination. These abilities gave them advantages in both survival and innovation. They could experiment with new techniques, adapt tools for different tasks, and conceive of strategies before carrying them out. For the first time, humans were not simply reacting to their environment. They were shaping it, bending it, even if slightly, to suit their needs. Evidence from fossils also shows changes in the rest of the body. Homo sapiens were leaner and more grey than their robust cousins like the Neanderthals. Long limbs suited them to endurance walking and running in warm climates. This build allowed them to travel great distances, tracking herds or moving between seasonal camps. They were not the largest or the strongest, but their bodies were efficient, designed for mobility and stamina. In the varied environments of Africa, this adaptability was a survival advantage. Another striking feature of early Homo sapiens is the beginnings of diversity. Even within Africa, populations showed variation in physical traits, reflecting adaptation to local conditions. This genetic diversity remains one of the hallmarks of our species today. Africa was and still is the heart of human variation, the place where the genetic foundations of humanity were laid down. Life 300,000 years ago was not easy. Predators such as lions, leopards, and hyenas roamed the land. Crocodiles lurked in rivers, and snakes slid through the grasses. Illness, injury, and scarcity posed constant threats. Yet, Homo sapiens endured. Their intelligence, social bonds, and adaptability gave them tools no claw or fang could match. In their hands, stone tools became extensions of thought, and in their minds, imagination began to flicker, hinting at a capacity for art, ritual, and storytelling. The rise of Homo sapiens in Africa marks the beginning of a species that would, one, day cross continents, sail oceans, and gaze at the stars. But in these early days, the focus was survival, finding food, raising children, and navigating shifting climates. They did not know they were the ancestors of billions to come. They were simply living step by step in a world that demanded resilience and rewarded ingenuity. From the rounded skulls of Jabelia to the ochre-stained stones of southern Africa, the evidence shows a species on the cusp of greatness. They were not yet building civilizations, but they were building the foundations of everything that would follow. The combination of larger brains, social cooperation, and adaptability made them unlike any hominin before. The emergence of Homo sapiens was not the end of evolution, but it was the beginning of something unique, a species capable of imagination, reflection, and innovation. In the quiet camps of ancient Africa, under star-filled skies, the first truly modern humans walked, thought, and dreamed. Their journey had just begun, but the world was already changing in their wake. The world in which early Homo sapiens emerged was anything but stable. Climate was not a gentle backdrop, but a restless force, forever reshaping the land, the plants, and the animals upon which humans depended. Over the last few 100,000 years, Earth swung repeatedly between ice ages and warmer interglacial periods. Deserts expanded and shrank, forests grew and receded, and coastlines shifted dramatically as ice sheets advanced and retreated. For our ancestors, survival meant adjusting to these endless changes, finding ways to live in environments that could transform within a few generations. During the ice ages, enormous glaciers covered much of the northern hemisphere. These ice sheets were so vast that they locked away huge amounts of water, causing sea levels to drop by more than 100 tons mel. Vast stretches of land that are now submerged, like the Sunda Shelf in the Southeast Asia, or the Bering Land Bridge between Siberia and Alaska were exposed, opening new routes for migration. At the same time, areas closer to the equator became colder and drier. Grasslands spread across regions that had once been forests, and deserts expanded their reach. For early humans in Africa, this meant that the Sahara was not always the endless desert we picture today. At times it was lush and green, dotted with lakes and rivers, rich with fish and game. At other times, it became an unbroken expanse of sand, a formidable barrier to movement. These fluctuations shaped where humans could live and how they found food. In wetter periods, rivers and lakes teemed with life, offering fish, birds, and fertile ground for gathering plants. Groups could settle for longer in these resource-rich areas, forming hubs of human activity. But when the climate dried, those same regions became barren, forcing people to move on. The unpredictability of the environment demanded flexibility. Those who could adapt to both abundance and scarcity were the ones who endured. Cold periods also influenced the kinds of animals available for hunting. In Ice Age Europe, Homo sapiens and Neanderthals alike hunted mammoths, reindeer, and woolly rhinoceroses, creatures well adapted to the cold steppes. In warmer interludes, forests returned, and with them came red deer, wild boar, and smaller game. Hunting strategies had to shift accordingly. Spears and cooperation worked well for large herds, while smaller animals required patience and tracking skills. This constant adjustment sharpened human ingenuity and encouraged innovation in tools and tactics. The shifting climate also influenced human bodies. Populations living in colder regions often developed stockier builds, conserving heat more effectively. Those, say, in hotter areas tended toward leaner bodies, better suited for shedding heat. These are classic examples of natural selection, where environmental pressures leave lasting imprints on anatomy. Even skin color was shaped by climate. In equatorial regions, darker pigmentation protected against intense ultraviolet radiation, while in northern latitudes, lighter skin improved vitamin D production in conditions of weaker sunlight. The diversity of human appearance today reflects countless generations of adaptation to different climates. One of the most fascinating impacts of climate change on early humans was the way it drove migration. As environments shifted, so did the opportunities they offered. Expanding deserts or ice sheets might push groups away, while newly fertile areas pulled them in. These pushes and pulls acted like a natural conveyor belt, encouraging populations to spread across continents. It was, Not always a conscious journey of exploration. Often it was simple necessity. If the rivers dried up or the herds moved on, humans followed, step by step, generation by generation. Climate nudged humanity outward, shaping the great migrations that carried our species around the globe. But climate was not only a force of disruption, it was also a teacher. Surviving in unpredictable environments required foresight, planning, and cooperation. When drought threatened, knowledge of distant waterholes or seasonal migrations of animals became essential. Memory and communication took on greater importance. The stories and traditions preserve survival strategies. Around the campfire, knowledge could be passed from elders to children, ensuring that lessons learned during hard times were not lost. In this way, climate instability may have played a direct role in the growth of human culture and cognition. Archaeological evidence shows how humans adapted to changing environments. In Africa, sites reveal stone tools suited for different tasks, from butchering large animals to processing plant materials. In wetter periods, there is evidence of fishing and gathering along lake shores, while in drier times, people relied more on roots, seeds, and mobile hunting. The ability to switch diets depending on what was available was one of Homo sapiens' greatest strengths. Where other species faltered when their preferred food vanished, humans broadened their options. Flexibility became a survival strategy in its own right. The impact of shifting climates can also be seen in the patterns of human dispersal. Genetic studies suggest that at least some waves of migration out of Africa coincided with periods when the Sahara was green and passable. At other times, desert sand, ice created barriers that isolated populations for thousands of years. This ebb and flow of connection and isolation helped shape the genetic diversity of our species. Groups separated by harsh climates developed unique traits, while later contact blended those differences back together. Even art and symbolism may have roots in the challenges of climate. When environments grew harsh, cooperation and shared identity became more important. Symbols, whether painted on cave walls, carved into tools, or worn as ornaments, may have helped bind groups together, reinforcing social cohesion in times of stress. In this way, the pressures of climate may have indirectly encouraged the growth of culture and imagination. Living through such dramatic shifts must have been daunting. Imagine being part of a small band of hunter-gatherers, watching as familiar rivers dried up, forests withered, and the animals you depended on vanished. Yet, our ancestors were not passive victims. They were problem solvers. They tracked new herds, learned to dig for tubers, and carried water in skins. They sought out caves and built shelters. They endured. Each adaptation, no matter how small, was a victory against the odds. Over the course of hundreds of thousands of years, climate sculpted humanity as much as bones and tools did. It tested resilience, rewarded ingenuity, and encouraged migration. It demanded cooperation and sharpened minds. Our species is not simply a product of biology, but of environment shaped again and again by the rhythms of ice, desert, and rain, the rise and fall of ice sheets, the greening and drying of the Sahara, the expansion and contraction of forests. All these cycles were chapters in the human story. Each one left its mark, pressing us to adapt, to imagine, and to move. Climate was not just the stage upon which our ancestors lived. It was an active participant in their journey, a restless force that both threatened and inspired. In its changing face, early humans learned the most valuable lesson of all. Survival belongs not to the strongest, but to the most adaptable. Around 70,000 years ago, a remarkable journey began that would eventually carry Homo sapiens across the entire globe. For hundreds of thousands of years, our species had lived and evolved in Africa, adapting to the continent's shifting climates and landscapes. But during this period, small groups of humans began to push beyond familiar territory, leaving Africa behind to explore the wider world. This was the Great Migration, the first steps in humanity's expansion that would eventually see people living on every continent except Antarctica. Genetic evidence suggests that while earlier migrations out of Africa had occurred, the most successful wave took place between 60 and 70,000 years ago. These were not great caravans of people moving all at once, but rather small bands, perhaps just a few dozen individuals following rivers, coastlines, and sources of food. Over generations, these groups spread into new lands, their descendants branching outward like tributaries of a river, carrying with them the story of our species. The routes they followed have long been the subject of study and debate. One pathway likely led through the Sinai Peninsula into the Levant, where humans would have encountered landscapes already familiar to Neanderthals. Another, increasingly supported by archaeological and genetic evidence, took a southern route, hugging the coasts of the Red Sea, moving through what is now Yemen and Oman, and continuing along the shores of the Arabian Peninsula. The coastlines provided abundant resources, shellfish, fish, and edible plants, making them natural highways for human migration. Traveling along the sea, humans could move steadily eastward, their footprints leaving faint traces in the sand and their campfires, glowing against the night. From these routes, populations spread into Asia. Evidence from sites in India suggests that humans were present there by at least 65,000 years ago. As they moved further east, some groups continued along the coasts, while others ventured inland, adapting to forests, rivers, and plains. The ability of Homo sapiens to thrive in such diverse environments highlights their adaptability. Unlike species tied to a narrow niche, humans could survive by adjusting their diets, crafting new tools, and learning from the land itself. One of the most astonishing aspects of this migration is how quickly humans reached the far edges of Asia. By around 65 to 50,000 years ago, they had traveled through Southeast Asia and begun to settle the vast islands of Indonesia. This required crossing stretches of open water, something no other hominin had managed on such a scale. Even if the sea levels were lower at the time, there were still channels that demanded some form of seafaring ability. Simple rafts or dugout canoes may have carried our ancestors across these waters, making them among the earliest mariners in history. From there, humans pushed onward into Australia. By about 50,000 years ago, Homo sapiens had reached this continent, a land unlike any they had known before. Australia was home to giant marsupials, enormous birds, and unique ecosystems. Yet humans adapted swiftly, bringing with them fire, tools, and cooperative hunting strategies. The presence of early rock art in northern Australia, some dating back tens of thousands of years, shows that these first settlers carried not only survival skills, but also a sense of imagination and culture. This spread into Asia and Australia was not the work of a single pioneering group, but of many waves, branching and diverging over time. Some populations may have thrived while others vanished, leaving no descendants. The genetic record shows that today's human populations outside Africa trace their ancestry back to these early travelers, carrying within them fragments of those original journeys. What drove these migrations is a question with no single answer. Climate shifts may have played a role, opening green corridors through what were once deserts or lowering sea levels to expose new coastal routes. Population pressures in Africa could have encouraged groups to seek new lands. Curiosity may also have been a factor as humans explored beyond the horizon, compelled by the same restlessness that drives exploration even today. Whatever the reason, once begun, the migration became unstoppable, each generation moving a little further, establishing new footholds across the map. The movement out of Africa also brought encounters with other human species. In the Middle East and parts of Europe, Homo sapiens met Neanderthals. In Asia, they encountered Denisovans. These meetings were not always hostile. Genetic evidence shows that interbreeding occurred, leaving lasting marks in modern DNA. The Great Migration was not simply a story of replacement, but also of blending as different branches of the human family came together, shared genes, and then moved apart. Archaeological traces of these journeys provide a fascinating glimpse into daily life. In coastal caves, shells with drilled holes suggest that humans decorated themselves with ornaments, perhaps as signs of identity or beauty. Hearths reveal the importance of fire as both a tool and a social center. Stone tools show the gradual spread and refinement of technology. Each of these traces is a quiet reminder that the people making these journeys were not just surviving. They were creating culture, carrying with them traditions, ideas, and symbols that gave meaning to their lives. Reaching Australia marked one of the most extraordinary achievements of early humans. It demonstrated not only physical endurance, but also the capacity to innovate, to build watercraft, and to navigate unfamiliar environments. From Africa to Australia is a span of more than 10,000 kilometers. Yet within the span of a few tens of thousands of years, humans accomplished it with little more than stone tools, fire, and their own ingenuity. It is a testament to the adaptability and determination of our species. The Great Migration out of Africa was not the end of movement, but the beginning of humanity's global spread. From Asia, some populations would later move into Europe, others into the cold steppes of Siberia, and still others across the land bridge, into the Americas. But it all began with those first small groups stepping beyond Africa, venturing into landscapes no one of their kind had ever seen before. The story of this migration is not just about survival. It is about the spirit of movement, the willingness to face uncertainty, and the capacity to adapt. In every shell bead, every footprint, and every shard of stone along these ancient paths lies a reminder of humanity's greatest strength: the ability to wander, to endure, and to make new worlds home. When Homo sapiens first left Africa and began to wander into Eurasia, they discovered that the world was not empty. Across Europe and Western Asia, the Neanderthals were already well established, perfectly adapted to the cold steppes and forests of the Ice Age. Further east, in the shadow of Asian mountains and caves, the Denisovans lived and thrived, though their presence would remain unknown to us until the 21st century. For tens of thousands of years, our ancestors shared the planet with these cousins, and rather than keeping entirely to themselves, they mingled, forming connections that would leave a genetic legacy still present in our bodies today. The evidence for this mingling is written in DNA. In 2010, the first draft of a Neanderthal genome was published, and with it came a revelation. People of non-African descent carried between 1 and 2% Neanderthal DNA in their genomes. This meant that at some point, early Homo sapiens had interbred with Neanderthals. The encounter was not a one-off curiosity, but repeated enough to leave a lasting imprint. For years, textbooks had presented Neanderthals as an evolutionary dead end. Yet, here they were, living on inside modern humans, their genes woven into our biological fabric. A similar story unfolded with the Denisovans. The discovery of Denisovan DNA from a fingerbone in Siberia revealed another branch of humanity, and genetic studies soon showed that their legacy was strongest in people from Melanesia, Papua New Guinea, and parts of Australia, where up to 5% of the genome can be traced back to them. This meant that as Homo sapiens spread through Asia, they met Denisovans and formed bonds that went beyond simple coexistence. Just as with the Neanderthals, these meetings were not purely confrontational. They involved shared lives and offspring, blending lineages in ways no one had imagined. What did these encounters look like? It is easy to picture them as tense or hostile, with rival groups competing for land and food, and certainly competition must have existed. But the genetic evidence makes clear that encounters were not always violent. There must have been times when individuals from different groups lived together, raised children, and built communities. Love, alliances, or simply survival could have drawn them together. In these unions, barriers between species blurred, and humanity's story became one of connection as much as separation. The contributions of these cousins were not trivial. Some of the genes inherited from Neanderthals and Denisovans turned out to be advantageous. Neanderthal DNA influences skin and hair, helping early humans adapt to lower levels of sunlight in northern regions. It also plays a role in immune systems, strengthening defenses against pathogens that Homo sapiens had never encountered before leaving Africa. Denison DNA famously gave Tibetans the ability to thrive at high altitudes, a genetic gift that allowed life on the roof of the world where oxygen is scarce. In this sense, interbreeding was not merely incidental. It gave our species tools for survival in environments that might otherwise have been deadly. The genetic legacy, however, is not entirely positive. Certainly, and genes are linked to conditions like type 2 diabetes, lupus, and even some aspects of depression and addiction. Evolution does not hand out gifts without strings attached. What was once beneficial for survival in an ice age may not always be so helpful in the modern world. Still, the overall impact is undeniable. Interbreeding broadened the genetic toolkit of Homo sapiens, shaping who we are today. The discovery of this shared heritage has transformed how we view our cousins. For much of the 20th century, Neanderthals were depicted as brutish and primitive, destined to be replaced by superior Homo sapiens. Denisovans, until recently, were not even known. Now we see them differently. They were intelligent, resourceful, and capable of culture. They cared for their young, used tools, and expressed symbolic behavior. They were not so different from us, and in many ways, they were part of us. Fossil evidence supports the idea that contact between these groups was not rare. In Denisova Cave, for example, researchers discovered a fragment of bone belonging to a girl who was the direct offspring of a Neanderthal mother and a Denisovan father. This astonishing find shows that not only did Homo sapiens interbreed with other species, but Neanderthals and Denisovans also mixed with one another. The boundaries between human groups were more fluid than we once believed, making the human family tree less a tidy hierarchy and more a tangled web. For Homo sapiens, these encounters may also have had cultural impacts. Living alongside Neanderthals and Denisovans would have brought opportunities to exchange knowledge. While it is difficult to prove the direct transmission of ideas, some researchers suggest that exposure to the human species may have influenced tool styles, hunting strategies, or symbolic practices. Even if these cultural exchanges were limited, the very act of coexistence meant that our ancestors were part of a broad community of human species, each shaping the other in subtle ways. The legacy of these meetings is still being uncovered. Advances in ancient DNA research allow scientists to detect genetic traces even from cave sediments where no bones remain. Every new analysis reveals a little more of the intertwined history between Homo sapiens and their cousins. Far from being a simple tale of replacement, the story of human evolution is now seen as a rich tapestry of contact, interbreeding, and survival. Perhaps the most profound realization is how recent these connections were. Only about 40,000 years ago, Europe and Asia were shared landscapes where multiple human species lived side by side. In evolutionary terms, that is the blink of an eye. Our ancestors would have looked into the eyes of Neanderthals and not as distant oddities, but as neighbors, trading partners, rivals, or even family. In the end, only Homo sapiens survived as the sole branch of humanity. But the others did not vanish without leaving a mark. Their genes endure, influencing our bodies, our health, and our adaptability. They remind us that we're not a species apart, but one shaped by contact and connection. The story of humanity is not just ours, it is also theirs, carried forward in every breath and heartbeat of those who inherited their legacy. Meeting our cousins was not an incidental footnote in prehistory. It was a turning point when the paths of different humans crossed and merged. In caves, on coastlines, and across mountains, bonds were formed that still echo in our DNA. The Neanderthals and Denisovans may be gone, but their presence lingers within us, a reminder that we are and have always been a shared humanity. At some point in the long arc of human history, a remarkable transformation took place. Words appeared, not the simple calls or gestures used by other primates, but true language, a system of sounds and symbols capable of expressing abstract ideas, memories of the past, and visions of the future. It is one of the defining traits of Homo sapiens, the gift that allows us to share knowledge, build culture, and weave the stories that bind communities together. Yet, The origins of language are among the most difficult puzzles in anthropology. Bones and tools fossilize, but words vanish on the wind. To piece together the beginnings of speech, scientists must turn to clues hidden in our anatomy, our brains, and the faint echoes of symbolic thought. Communication, of course, was not invented suddenly. Long before words, our ancestors were already expressing themselves. Chimpanzees, our closest living relatives, used dozens of calls to signal alarm, request food, or coordinate movement. They also use facial expressions and gestures to reinforce meaning. Early hominins likely did the same, their social lives demanding more complex signals than grunts and cries. Living in groups meant keeping track of alliances, calming disputes, and teaching skills. Over time, these gestures and vocalizations may have become more varied and structured, laying the foundation for something greater. Anatomy provides important hints. The hyoid bone, a small horseshoe-shaped bone in the throat, plays a critical role in speech by supporting the tongue and vocal tract. Fossils show that Neanderthals possessed a hyoid bone much like our own, suggesting they had the physical capacity for speech. The shape of the skull and the position of the larynx also matter as they determine the range of sounds a voice can produce. By around 300,000 years ago, early Homo sapiens had vocal tracts capable of producing the wide variety of sounds we use today. This physical potential does not prove they had language, but it makes it clear they were equipped for it. The brain offers more evidence. Two regions, Broca's area and Wernicke's area, are central to processing language. These areas are present in modern humans and appear to have been enlarged or reorganized in early Homo sapiens compared to earlier hominins. The expansion of these brain regions suggests that the capacity for complex speech was emerging alongside other cognitive abilities such as planning, symbolic thought, and memory. Theories about how language began are diverse. Some researchers argue for a gesture-first model, suggesting that early humans relied heavily on hand movements and body language before vocal speech took over. Others propose that vocal communication developed gradually from calls, whistles, and rhythmic sounds used during cooperative activities like hunting. A popular idea is that language evolved as a tool for social bonding, replacing the grooming behavior seen in other primates. Instead of spending hours picking through each other's fur, humans could use words to maintain relationships across larger groups. Talking in this sense became a kind of vocal grooming. However it began, the advantages of language were enormous. With words, humans could share information about food sources, warn of dangers, and coordinate hunts with far greater efficiency. They could also transmit knowledge across generations, preserving discoveries that would otherwise have been lost. The first sparks of culture, traditions, rituals, and collective memory were possible because people could tell each other about them. Language extended the human mind outward, allowing ideas to live not just in one brain, but across many. Symbolic thought and language are deeply intertwined. The ability to use symbols to let one thing stand for another is at the heart of both. Archaeological evidence of symbolism appears tens of thousands of years ago in beads made from shells, geometric carvings, and the careful use of pigments. These objects suggest that humans were capable of abstract representation, attaching meaning to shapes and colors. If they could do this with art, it is likely they could also do it with sounds. A word is, after all, just a symbol, a sound representing an object, an action, or an idea. One striking clue comes from music. Flutes made from bird bones dating back over 40,000 years have been found in Europe. The presence of musical instruments suggests that early humans had a rich auditory culture capable of creating and remembering complex sound patterns. Music and language share many features such as rhythm, pitch, and the organization of sequences. The ability to play and appreciate music may have developed alongside the ability to speak, both springing from the same underlying capacities in the brain. The impact of language on human society cannot be overstated. With it, groups could grow larger, bound together, not only by kinship, but by shared stories and rules. Leaders could persuade, shamans could inspire, and hunters could coordinate. Over time, myths and traditions emerged, shaping identities and guiding behavior. Language turned survival into culture, enabling humans to pass on lessons not just of how to hunt or gather, but of why they belonged together, who they were, and what they believed. Language also transformed the way humans thought as individuals. The ability to name objects sharpened perception. Once something had a word, it could be recalled, described, and compared. Memory became more structured and imagination became richer. People could think in sequences of words, planning actions before carrying them out. They could imagine events that had never happened or picture scenarios far in the future. In this way, language was not just a tool for communication, but a tool for thought itself. It is worth remembering that language is not a single invention, but a multitude of forms. Thousands of languages exist today, each with its own grammar, rhythm, and poetry. This diversity suggests that once the capacity for language emerged, it blossomed into endless variations shaped by geography, culture, and history. The universality of language in human society shows how deeply it is woven into what it means to be human. There are no cultures without it. Wherever Homo sapiens went, words followed. And yet, the earliest languages are lost to us. No recordings, no written traces remain from tens of thousands of years ago. All we can do is infer their presence from the artifacts and from their genetic and anatomical clues left behind. Still, even without direct evidence, the fingerprints of language are everywhere in the archaeological record, in the complexity of tools, in the presence of symbols, and in the spread of culture. The gift of language is one of evolution's most profound achievements. From the murmur of campfire conversations to the chants of rituals, from the first whispered warnings on the savannah to the epic tales carved into memory, words became the threads that stitched humans together. They gave us the power to teach, to imagine, and to dream. Language was not just a way to survive. It was a way to become fully human, a way to turn fleeting thoughts into something that could endure. In the end, it was our greatest inheritance, a chorus of voices stretching across time, carrying forward the story of humanity and sound and symbol. Tens of thousands of years ago, deep inside caves where flickering firelight barely reached the walls, early humans began to leave behind something extraordinary. They painted animals in vivid colors, carved figurines from stone and bone, and arranged objects in ways that served no immediate practical purpose. These acts were not about survival in the ordinary sense. They were expressions of imagination, symbols of meaning, the first sparks of what we might call art. Through these creations, Homo sapiens revealed that their minds were capable of more than tool-making or hunting. They were beginning to think, symbolically, to give form to ideas and to explore worlds beyond the material one. One of the most famous sites that captures this leap of imagination is Lascaux in France. Discovered in the 20th century, its walls are covered with paintings of horses, bison, deer, and other animals, some depicted in motion with remarkable skill. These images are over 17,000 years old, yet they still carry a sense of life and vitality. The artist who made them did not simply draw outlines, they shaded, blended, and used the natural contours of the rock to enhance the sense of depth. It is as if they were bringing the animals into the cave, transforming stone walls into living scenes. Even older examples exist in Chauvet Cave. Also in France, paintings date back more than 30,000 years. And in some caves in Spain, Rodochra, markings have been dated to at least 65,000 years ago. These may even have been made by Neanderthals, suggesting that symbolic thought was not limited to Homo sapiens alone. In Africa, rock art stretches back tens of thousands of years as well, showing that this capacity for imagery was widespread. Wherever humans lived, they found ways to translate thought into form. What drove this explosion of creativity? Some researchers suggest that art began as a form of communication. A painting of an animal might have been a way to share information about hunting, migration, or spiritual beliefs. Others argue that it was tied to ritual, with images serving as part of ceremonies meant to influence the world, to bring luck in hunting, to honor spirits, or to connect with forces beyond the visible. Whatever the exact reasons, the act of creating art shows a capacity for abstraction, for letting one thing stand in for another. That leap is at the heart of imagination. Sculptures and figurines add another dimension to this story. The Venus figurines found across Europe and dated to around 25 to 30,000 years ago are small carvings of female forms, often with exaggerated features such as wide hips and large breasts. Their exact meaning is debated. Some see them as fertility symbols, others as representations of idealized beauty, or perhaps even self-portraits carved by women themselves. Regardless of their purpose, they demonstrate an ability to conceptualize, to create objects that carried symbolic weight rather than practical utility. These were not tools for cutting or scraping, but for thinking, believing, and expressing. Burials also provide evidence of symbolic behavior and ritual. At sites like Sunar in Russia, burials dating back over 30,000 years contain bodies adorned with thousands of beads, ivory spears, and carefully arranged ornaments. The effort required to create such burials suggests a belief in meaning beyond life itself. To bury the dead with care and decoration implies memory, respect, and perhaps a sense of an afterlife. These rituals reveal that humans were not only aware of death, but sought to make sense of it to give it narrative and structure. The use of pigments, especially red ochre, adds further depth. Ochre has been found in sites dating back hundreds of thousands of years, sometimes used to color objects, sometimes applied to bodies. Its widespread use hints at symbolic or ritualistic purposes. The choice to decorate oneself or one's surroundings with color suggests an appreciation for aesthetics and an awareness of identity. By marking the body, early humans may have signaled social roles, group membership, or spiritual beliefs. In doing so, they turn their bodies into canvases, making art not only external, but personal. These symbolic acts also reveal something crucial about the human mind. They demonstrate imagination, the ability to picture things that are not present, to create representations of animals, spirits, or concepts. This ability allowed humans to build myths and stories, to create shared beliefs that united groups. A story told around a fire could bind a community together, giving them a shared past and a vision of purpose. Symbols and art became the glue of society, reinforcing cooperation and identity. The connection between art and survival may not be obvious, but it is profound. Groups that shared symbols and stories could cooperate more effectively, trust one another, and build larger, more cohesive communities. A painting on a cave wall or a necklace of shells might have served as a marker of belonging, signaling loyalty to a group. In this way, art was not just decoration, but a tool of social cohesion. As vital to survival as spears or fire, music too enters the picture. Flutes carved from bird bones and mammoth ivory, dating back more than 40,000 years, show that early humans created melody and rhythm. Music is intangible, fleeting, yet it carries powerful symbolic meaning. It can stir emotions, strengthen bonds, and mark rituals. The presence of musical instruments suggests that the human capacity for creativity extended far beyond the visual, encompassing sound, rhythm, and performance. The imagination displayed in early art, figurines, burials, and music points to a mind no longer limited to the immediate. Homo sapiens had begun to create worlds within worlds, symbolic realms where animals became spirits. Figurines carried meaning and rituals bridged life and death. This cognitive leap may be one of the greatest in our history, transforming us from clever toolmakers into storytellers, artists, and dreamers. Even today, the echoes of these beginnings remain. The cave paintings of Lascaux and Chauvet still inspire awe, their colors vivid despite the passage of millennia. The Venus figurines remind us of the mystery of human belief, of how meaning can be carved into stone. The ochre-stained burials and bone flutes whisper of rituals and songs that once filled air. Together, they show that our ancestors were not only surviving, but also searching for beauty, meaning, and connection. The emergence of art and symbols reveals the moment when the human mind turned inward and outward at once. Inward to imagination, outward to expression. It was the point at which survival became more than finding food or shelter. It became about understanding, about creating, about leaving marks that could outlast a lifetime. Through these symbols, humans began to shape culture, crafting a world not only of necessity, but of meaning. And in that, they left us the first reflections of ourselves, captured forever in pigment, stone, and song. For most of human history, life was lived on the move. Small groups of hunter-gatherers followed the rhythms of the seasons, tracking herds, gathering fruits, nuts, and roots, and rarely staying in one place for long. Mobility was survival. If the rains shifted or the herds wandered, people packed up and followed. Yet somewhere between 15 and 10,000 years ago, a quiet revolution began. Humans started to linger. Camps became seasonal bases, and eventually, some became permanent. The first settlements were born, marking one of the greatest turning points in the story of Homo sapiens. What made people begin to stay put? Part of the answer lies in the changing climate at the end of the last ice age. As glaciers receded and temperatures warmed, landscapes transformed, grasslands blossomed, forests expanded, and wild grains grew, in abundance across regions like the Fertile Crescent in the Middle East. For hunter-gatherers, this meant that food could be found more reliably in certain areas. Why wander endlessly if a patch of fertile ground could provide season after season? Settling even temporarily was suddenly a viable option. Archaeological sites from this period reveal the beginnings of semi-century life. In places like the Natufian culture of the Levant, people built more permanent houses out of stone and brush. These were not cities, but they were more than temporary camps. Tools became more specialized, grinding stones for processing wild cereals, sickles for harvesting, and storage pits for keeping surplus food. Dogs, already domesticated from wolves, became companions and guards, binding human groups more firmly to their settlements. For the first time, humans were experimenting with a lifestyle that tied them to a particular landscape. Perhaps the most astonishing sight from this era is Göbekli in modern-day Turkey, dating back nearly 12,000 years. Here, massive stone pillars, some weighing several tons, were arranged in circular enclosures and decorated with carvings of animals, lions, snakes, birds, and wild boar. The sheer scale of the site is breathtaking. This was no small campfire gathering, but a monumental construction project requiring planning, organization, and cooperation on a scale previously unimaginable. What makes Quebec particularly fascinating is that it predates the full adoption of agriculture. These people were still, for the most part, hunter-gatherers. They did not live in large villages or farm fields of wheat, yet they gathered in great numbers to build and carve. This suggests that the desire for communal spaces for ritual and social gathering may have been a driving force in the shift towards settled life. Rather than farming leading to temples, it may have been the other way around. Temples and communal rituals created the need for more permanent settlements, which in turn encouraged farming. The significance of such communal space cannot be overstated. They were places where different groups came together, where knowledge, traditions, and marriages may have been exchanged. They also served as centers for ritual, where people expressed beliefs, honored ancestors, or sought connection with unseen forces. In these shared spaces, humanity began to forge cultural bonds that extended beyond the immediate family group. Settlements were not just about food and shelter. They were about identity and belonging. Living in one place also brought new challenges. Hunter-gatherers could move away from waste or disease, but in settlements, sanitation became an issue. Storing food required vigilance against pests. Larger gatherings risked conflict over resources. making rules and cooperation more important than ever. These challenges, however, also spurred innovation. The beginnings of social organization, division of labor, and shared responsibilities began to emerge, setting the stage for the complex societies that would follow. The transition from a fully nomadic lifestyle to permanent settlement was gradual. Some groups remained mobile for thousands of years, while others experimented with mixed strategies, moving seasonally but returning to the same places year after year. Over time, the advantages of staying put became clearer. With settlements came the ability to store food, to cultivate plants deliberately, and to keep animals close at hand. The first true farmers were not yet present in the age of Quebec, but the seeds of agriculture, both literal and cultural, were being sown. The psychological shift was profound. For generations, humans had thought of the world as something to move through, not to own. Settling down meant forming deeper attachments to land. A grove of trees was no longer just a source of fruit. It was part of home. A spring was not just a place to drink. It was a shared resource to be protected. With these attachments came new ways of thinking about territory, ancestry, and belonging. The world was no longer just a series of temporary shelters, but a landscape of meaning. Art and symbolism flourished in these early settled communities. The carvings of Quebec stand as dramatic proof, but smaller artifacts tell similar stories. Beads, decorated tools, and ritual objects appear more frequently in this period. These items suggest that with more stable lives, humans had the time and security to invest in creativity and ritual. Symbolism was not a luxury. It was a means of cementing community ties and expressing shared values. The first settlements also reshaped human relationships. Larger gatherings created more opportunities for cooperation, but also for conflict. Negotiating disputes, forming alliances, and establishing social hierarchies became more important. Some individuals likely rose to prominence as organizers, ritual leaders, or skilled craftsmen. While these were not kings or rulers, they were the early seeds of leadership and structured society. What is striking about these early sites is their mixture of the familiar and the strange. On the one hand, they show humans beginning to live in ways we recognize today, staying in one place, building lasting structures, and gathering in communal spaces. On the other, they reveal a world where agriculture had not yet fully taken hold, where people still relied on wild plants and animals, and yet somehow built monumental architecture. It is a reminder that history is not always linear. The path from hunter-gatherers to farmers to city builders was winding, full of experiments, false starts, and surprising achievements. The first settlements mark the point at which humans began to reshape not just tools or objects, but entire landscapes. They represent a shift from adapting to the environment to actively modifying it. Fields, hearths, stone circles, and storage pits became part of the human footprint. These changes may seem small compared to modern cities, but in their time, they were revolutionary. From mobile bands of foragers to communities anchored by stone and ritual, the transition to settlements laid the foundation for everything that followed. Gobechi and other early communal sites stand as monuments to the imagination and cooperation of our ancestors. They show that humans were not content to merely survive. They sought meaning, belonging, and permanence. The first settlements were more than places to sleep. They were the birthplaces of culture, society, and the shared human journey that continues to this day. Roughly 12,000 years ago, humans began one of the boldest experiments in our history. Instead of wandering the landscape in search of food, they started to bend nature to their will. Wild plants were coaxed into fields, animals were brought close to campfires, and the first steps toward farming were taken. This shift, known as domestication, was more than a clever survival strategy. It was a partnership between humans and nature, one that would change not only our species, but also the very evolution of countless plants and animals. The process began with plants. In regions like the Fertile Crampon, humans noticed that certain wild grains such as wheat and barley grew in abundance. Gathering them provided a dependable food source, but these plants had quirks that made them difficult to harvest. Wild wheat, for example, shatters easily when ripe, scattering seeds across the ground. Yet some plants were naturally less fragile, holding onto their seeds longer. When early gatherers unintentionally selected these sturdier varieties by carrying them home and planting them near camps, they set in motion a slow process of change. Over generations, wheat and barley adapted to human needs, becoming larger, easier to harvest, and less dependent on the wind for dispersal. This was not a one-sided affair. As humans shaped plants, the plants shaped humans in return. Farming required people to stay in one place, to clear land, and to invest in cycles of sowing and harvest. These demands fostered new social structures, new tools, and eventually entire communities organized around agriculture. The bond between humans and crops was mutual. We gave them protection and propagation, and they gave us nourishment in staggering abundance. Animals soon followed. The first to join humans on their journey were dogs, descendants of wolves that had lingered near human camps. Those wolves that were less aggressive and more tolerant of humans found scraps of food and warmth, while humans gained allies that could warn of danger and help with hunting. Over generations, this relationship deepened, and the wolf's wild edges softened into the loyalty of the dog. From this earliest companionship, the idea of domesticating animals spread. Sheep and goats were among the next recruits. They provided meat, milk, and hides, and unlike large game, they could be kept close and managed. Their size made them practical for hearing, and their temperaments, at least in some lineages, made them easier to tame. Cattle, descended from wild aurochs, were more challenging, but their strength and productivity made them invaluable. Pigs, always opportunists, were happy to live alongside humans, thriving on scraps and multiplying quickly. Each species that entered this partnership changed not only its own evolutionary path, but also the shape of human societies. Agriculture spread independently across the world. In China, rice and millet became staples, while in the Americas, maize, beans, and squash formed the basis of early farming. Potatoes were cultivated in the Andes, while yams and sorghum became central in Africa. This global patchwork of domesticated plants and animals shows that the drive to harness nature was not a single invention in one place, but a widespread adaptation to the opportunities of the environment. Wherever conditions allowed, humans looked at the wild world and imagined how it might be reshaped. The domestication of plants and animals was not without consequences. Diets became more stable, but also narrower. Early farmers often relied heavily on a small number of crops, leading to deficiencies compared to theme or varied diets of hunter-gatherers. Archaeological evidence shows that the first farming communities experience more tooth decay, nutritional stress, and disease than their nomadic counterparts. Yet the benefits of food security outweighed the drawbacks. Populations grew, settlements expanded, and societies became more complex. By cultivating plants and raising animals, humans also began to transform landscapes on a massive scale. Forests were cleared, rivers were diverted, and ecosystems reshaped. Domestication was not just about taming individual species. It was about redesigning entire environments. Fields replaced meadows, pastures replaced forests, and human settlements began to leave permanent marks on the earth. For the first time, humanity was not only adapting to nature, but actively engineering it. This transformation extended even to evolution itself. Domesticated species were guided by human choices rather than natural selection alone. The wheat that grows in fields today would never survive without us, its seeds too heavy to scatter on their own. Cattle have been bred for docility and productivity, traits that would disadvantage them in the wild. Dogs diverged so far from wolves that they became creatures designed for companionship as much as for survival. In shaping these species, humans became unwitting partners in evolution, directing its course toward traits that suited our needs. Domestication also shaped human evolution in subtle but profound ways. The ability to digest milk into adulthood, common today in many populations, arose because people who could tolerate lactose gained extra nutrition from their herds. Populations that relied heavily on grains adapted with changes in metabolism and resistance to certain diseases. Even our immune systems were altered by close contact with domesticated animals, which exposed humans to new pathogens. Some of history's greatest diseases, from measles to smallpox, trace their origins back to these early partnerships. The social effects of domestication were equally dramatic. With farming and hearing came the possibility of surplus, and with surplus came storage, trade, and inequality. Some individuals or groups could accumulate more than others, creating new dynamics of wealth and power. Hierarchies emerged along with new roles such as farmers, herders, and craftsmen. Communities grew larger, requiring more organization and cooperation. In a sense, domestication did not only produce food, it produced society itself. Yet for all its transformative impact, domestication remained deeply human at its core. It was not simply a technological shift, but also a cultural one. Rituals and beliefs grew around crops and animals, harvest festivals, fertility rites, and myths of creation reflected the central role of domesticated species in daily life. The cycle of sowing and harvest became woven into calendars, religions, and identities. Farming was not only about feeding the body, but also about feeding the imagination. The story of domestication is a reminder of how intertwined we are with the natural world. The wheat in a field, the dog at one's feet, the cattle grazing on pasture, all are products of a shared history spanning thousands of years. They are living proof that evolution can be steered, that species can shape one another's destinies. Humans did not conquer nature so much as enter into a complex partnership with it, one that continues to this day. From the first stalks of grain gathered in the Fertile Crescent to the herds grazing on distant plains, domestication transformed humanity into something new. It allowed us to settle, to grow, to build civilizations. It turned survival into abundance, though never without challenges. In reshaping the plants and animals around us, we also reshaped ourselves, altering the trajectory of both biology and culture. The fields and flocks of today are not just the products of agriculture. They are the echoes of an ancient alliance, a partnership written into the very fabric of life. The human body is a walking history book, carrying within its bones and muscles the story of millions of years of adaptation. Every curve of the spine, every proportion of limb to torso, every nuance of brain and pelvis tells of choices made not by individuals, but by generations shaped under the quiet pressure of evolution. Our anatomy is not an accident. It is the product of countless compromises, each one balancing survival, reproduction, and endurance. One of the most fundamental of these changes is bipedalism. Standing upright may seem ordinary to us, but in evolutionary terms, it was a radical shift. Our early ancestors traded the stability of 4 limbs for the efficiency of 2. The benefits were enormous. Walking upright freed the hands for carrying food, tools, or infants. It elevated the head, allowing for a wider view across the savanna to spot predators or prey. It made long distance travel more efficient, conserving energy over the course of a day's journey, but the costs were equally profound. Our spines curved into an elegant S-shape bear the strain of upright posture. Back pain, slipped discs, and aching joints are the lingering reminders of this evolutionary bargain. Bipedalism gave us freedom, but it also gave us the bad posture that chiropractors still profit from today. The pelvis, too, was reshaped by bipedalism. Shortened and broadened, it provided support for internal organs and created a platform for upright walking. But this new design also narrowed the birth canal, setting the stage for one of evolution's most dramatic compromises. Humans have unusually difficult childbirth compared to other primates. The reason lies in the combination of large infant heads and the constrained dimensions of the pelvis. Giving birth became a risky endeavor, one that often required social support. Midwifery, in its earliest form, may have roots deep in prehistory as women aided one another through the perilous process. Survival of both mother and child was never guaranteed, but cooperation increased the chances. In this way, even the shape of the pelvis reinforced the importance of community. The human brain is another defining feature of our anatomy, expanding dramatically over the last 2 million years. It grew to 3 times the size of earlier hominin brains. This growth was not uniform. The frontal lobes linked with reasoning, planning, and imagination expanded disproportionately. The results were profound. Language, art, memory, and abstract thought all trace back to this cerebral leap. But large brains come at a price. They demand enormous amounts of energy, consuming about 20% of our daily calories. They also take longer to mature, leaving human infants helpless for years compared to the young of other animals. The vulnerability of human children required extended parental care, fostering strong family bonds and cooperative communities. In essence, our brains forced us into social living, and social living in turn gave our brains the stimulation to grow even further. Endurance shaped our anatomy in more subtle but equally important ways. Humans are not the fastest sprinters, but we are among the greatest distance runners in the animal kingdom. Long legs, elastic tendons, springy arches in the feet, and sweat glands covering our bodies all contribute to this ability. While most animals cool themselves by panting, humans cool themselves by sweating across the entire skin, allowing us to run under the midday sun without overheating. This endurance allowed our ancestors to practice persistence hunting, tracking animals for hours until they collapse from exhaustion. The human body is, in many respects, a machine for long journeys. Whether walking across the plains of Africa or later migrating to the far corners of the globe, our anatomy carried a step by steady step. Hands add another layer to the story. The opposable thumb, capable of precise grip, gave humans the dexterity to shape tools, thread fibers, and later carve art. Our fingers are not simply shorter versions of ape hands. They're tuned for delicate manipulation as well as strength. A hand axe, a needle, or a bow all demand fine control, and our anatomy rose to the challenge. The hand became an extension of the mind, turning thought into action and imagination into objects that could be held, traded, or passed on. Yet for all these remarkable adaptations, the human body remains imperfect. Upright walking makes us efficient travelers, but also prone to knee injuries and flat feet. Large brains gave us intelligence, but also complicated childbirth. Endurance running enabled survival, but left us sweating buckets under the sun. Our anatomy is full of these compromises. Evolution is not an engineer designing flawless machines. It is a tinkerer patching old systems into new ones, leaving us with bodies that are good enough to survive, but far from perfect. Despite these flaws, the sum of these adaptations made humans uniquely suited to thrive in diverse environments. The balance of brain power, endurance, dexterity, and social reliance created a package that no other animal possessed. Where other species specialize narrowly, the speed of a cheetah, the strength of a gorilla, or the vision of an eagle, humans became generalists, able to survive in forests, deserts, tundras, and coasts. Our bodies were not designed for one environment, but adaptable enough for many. The story of our anatomy is also the story of cooperation. A difficult birth canal meant mothers needed help. Vulnerable infants required years of care. Hunting large animals demanded teamwork. Even endurance running worked best with group strategies, flushing prey toward others or sharing the chase. Every curve of bone and muscle reflects this dependence on each other. Humans are social to the core, not only by choice, but by necessity written into our very biology. As our species continued to evolve, the pressures of environment, diet, and culture shaped us further. Farming altered jaws and teeth, leading to more cavities, but also changing facial structure. The domestication of animals introduced new diseases to which our immune systems had to adapt. Variations in skin color emerged as populations spread across latitudes. balancing the need for vitamin D with protection from ultraviolet radiation. Each shift in lifestyle left its mark, layering adaptation upon adaptation. The human body, then, is both a triumph and a compromise. It is a structure honed for walking great distances, for cradling fragile infants, for crafting tools, and for thinking far beyond the present moment. It carries scars of its evolutionary past, but also the brilliance of survival strategies that worked. When you look at a skeleton, you're not just looking at bones, you're looking at their cord of countless ancestors who walked, ran, birthed, cared, and endured. Their lives are etched into every shape of our bodies. In the end, the shaping of the human body tells a story of persistence. Bipedalism gave us freedom. Brains gave us imagination. Childbirth demanded cooperation. And endurance carried us across the earth. Each adaptation was imperfect, but together they formed a body capable of extraordinary things. We are quite literally built from compromise, and yet somehow those compromises have allowed us not only to survive, but to thrive in almost every corner of the world. For hundreds of thousands of years, the human family was a diverse one. Neanderthals has roamed the forests and plains of Ice Age Europe. Denisovans thrived in parts of Asia, and Homo sapiens were still finding their place in Africa and beyond. These cousins were not shadows in our past, but living, breathing humans in their own right, hunting, gathering, raising children, and surviving through ingenuity. Yet by about 40,000 years ago, all Butone lineage remained. The Neanderthals and Denisovans faded into extinction while Homo sapiens spread to every corner of the globe. Their disappearance is one of the enduring mysteries of prehistory, a story written partly in fossils, partly in DNA, and partly in educated guesswork. The decline of the Neanderthals is the better known of the two stories. They'd thrived in Europe and Western Asia for hundreds of thousands of years, enduring multiple ice ages and mastering the art of survival in cold climates. Their bodies were perfectly adapted to the chill, short, stocky, and immensely strong, with large noses too, warm, icy air and muscles that could power through hunts of enormous game. They crafted tools, tended fires, and even buried their dead. For all their resilience, they disappeared from the fossil record around 39,000 years ago, not long after Homo sapiens arrived in Europe. Why did they vanish? Theories abound. One factor may have been climate instability. The period of their decline was marked by abrupt shifts in temperature, with sudden cold snaps that transformed forests into barren steppes and disrupted food supplies. Neanderthals had survived ice ages before, but these rapid swings may have strained already small populations. Unlike Homo sapiens, who formed wider social networks and exchanged resources across greater distances, Neanderthals lived in smaller, more isolated groups. When the environment turned harsh, isolation could be fatal. Competition with Homo sapiens also played a role. When our species entered Neanderthal territory, they brought new tools, broader diets, and larger communities. Homo sapiens were adaptable, generalists, able to hunt a wide range of animals, gather plants and fish along rivers and coasts. Neanderthals, in contrast, seemed to rely more heavily on large game. If mammoths or bison declined, their survival options narrowed. The flexibility of Homo sapiens gave them an edge in uncertain times, yet their relationship between the two species was not purely competitive. We know from DNA that they interbred sometimes frequently. People living today outside Africa carry between 1 and 2% Neanderthal DNA, evidence of intimate contact. These unions were not enough to preserve Neanderthals as a separate population, but they ensured that fragments of their legacy live on. In a sense, Neanderthals did not vanish entirely as they became part of us. The Denisovans remain more mysterious. Their bones are scarce, little more than a finger bone, a few teeth, and a jaw found in Tibet. Yet DNA has revealed a population spread across Asia, leaving genetic traces in modern people from Melanesia, Papua New Guinea, and Australia. They too interbred with Homo sapiens, and their genes still shape traits like high-altitude adaptation in Tibetan populations. Despite this legacy, Denisovans disappeared as a distinct group, their presence fading tens of thousands of years ago. The reasons for their decline are less clear than for Neanderthals. Geography may have been part of it. Spread out across vast areas of Asia, Denisovan populations may have been small and fragmented, vulnerable to local extinctions. When Homo sapiens arrived, bringing larger numbers and new technologies, the Denis may have been absorbed into the expanding wave of sapiens through interbreeding rather than wiped out by direct competition. Over time, their distinct identity dissolved, leaving only echoes in the genomes of their descendants. The survival of Homo sapiens, while others faded, is a question that continues to intrigue researchers. One explanation lies in innovation. Our ancestors developed new kinds of tools, from fine blades to bone needles, which allowed them to adapt more quickly to different environments. They created clothing suited to the cold, shelters against the elements, and symbolic systems that reinforce group identity. These innovations did not just make survival easier, they also helped larger groups cooperate, creating networks that could exchange resources and knowledge. Another explanation is demographic. Homo sapiens may simply have reproduced more successfully, with slightly larger and more interconnected populations. Their numbers grew while other species dwindled. Even small advantages in birth rates, survival of infants, or longevity could tip the balance over thousands of years. In the grand scale of evolution, numbers matter, and sapiens may have simply outpaced their cousins. There is also the question of imagination. Evidence from art, ornaments, and ritual suggests that Homo sapiens had a unique ability to create shared symbols. These symbols bound groups together, allowed strangers to cooperate, and gave communities resilience in times of stress. A painted handprint on a cave wall or a necklace of beads was not just decoration. It was a marker of identity, a way of saying we belong together in the face of harsh climates and scarce resources. This symbolic cohesion may have given sapiens an advantage in building alliances and maintaining larger social networks than Neanderthals or Denisovans could. Still, it would be a mistake to view Neanderthals and Denisovans as failures. They endured for hundreds of thousands of years, far longer than Homo sapiens existed so far. They survived ice ages, predators, and shifting landscapes. They hunted, raised families, and left their mark on the world. Their disappearance is not proof of weakness, but rather a reminder of how fragile survival can be, even for the most resilient of species. The extinction of our cousins also raises a sobering point. For most of human history, the Earth was shared by multiple human species. We were not alone, but part of a family tree with many living branches. Today, only one remains: us. The diversity that once defined humanity has narrowed, leaving a single species to carry forward the story. In our DNA, however, the Neanderthals and Denisovans are still present, their genes influencing everything from our immune system's to our ability to live at high altitudes. They may have faded as distinct groups, but they are not entirely gone. The last cousins faded quietly, not in a single dramatic moment, but over thousands of years. Their decline was shaped by climate, competition, small population sizes, and the relentless spread of Homo sapiens. Yet, their story is still with us, written in bones, in artifacts, and in the hidden code of ourselves. To walk through a modern city today is to walk among the descendants not only of early sapiens, but also of Neanderthals and Denisovans carried forward invisibly in our genes. Their disappearance was the end of an era, the closing of a chapter in which multiple human species walk the Earth together. It left Homo sapiens as the last survivor, the custodian of a shared legacy. We are in part their heirs, carrying fragments of their world into ours. The Neanderthals and Denisovans may have faded, but their story continues. Every time we take a breath, every time our blood carries oxygen at high altitudes, every time we speak, create, or dream, they are gone, yet still with us. the silent companions of our shared humanity. Evolution is often imagined as something distant, a process that shaped us in the deep past, but has long since slowed to a stop. After all, humans are everywhere now, building cities, curing diseases, and sending rockets into space. Surely natural selection has little left to do. And yet, the truth is that evolution never paused. It continues quietly, reshaping our species in ways both subtle and profound. From our ability to drink milk as adults, to our resistance against disease, to the strange new environments of the digital world, humanity is still a work in progress. One of the clearest examples of ongoing evolution is lactose tolerance. For most of human history, adults could not digest lactose, the sugar found in milk. In childhood, the enzyme lactase breaks down lactose. But in adulthood, the gene usually switched off, making milk consumption uncomfortable. That was the natural state for mammals. Milk was for infants, not for grown animals. But around 7,000 years ago, in regions of Europe, the Middle East, and Africa, something extraordinary happened. Populations that had domesticated cattle and goats developed genetic mutations that allowed lactase production to persist into adulthood. Suddenly, milk became not just baby food, but a lifelong source of nutrition. In a world where harvest could fail and meat was hard to come by, the ability to drink milk conferred a serious survival advantage. Today, lactose tolerance is common in some populations and rare in others, a living map of evolutionary adaptation to culture. Disease has also been a relentless driver of human evolution. Throughout history, epidemics have acted as natural selection on a vast scale. The Black Death of the 14th century, which killed millions across Europe, may have shaped genetic resistance in survivors, leaving descendants with stronger immune systems. Sickle cell trait, which can cause health problems in its severe form, persists because it provides protection against malaria in its milder form. The interplay between pathogens and human genetics is an ongoing arms race, with microbes evolving ways to exploit us and humans evolving defenses in return. Even today, genes are influencing how populations respond to illnesses such as HIV or COVID-19. Subtle reminders that we remain in the thick of evolutionary pressures. But evolution in the modern world is not limited to disease or diet. Culture itself creates new environments that exert selective forces. Consider the rise of urban living. For most of our history, humans lived in small groups scattered across wide landscapes. Cities are an incredibly recent invention, appearing only in the last few thousand years. Yet, they bring unique challenges: dense populations, pollution, and constant contact with strangers. Genes that influence how we handle stress, crowding, and pathogens in urban environments may now play a role in shaping future populations. What once mattered on the open savanna may be less critical than what matters in the bustle of a mega-city. Technology adds another twist. Glasses, antibiotics, and modern medicine have altered the pressures of natural selection. Traits that might once have been disadvantageous are now far less so. Poor eyesight. Once a liability in hunting and gathering is easily corrected with lenses. Medical interventions allow people with conditions that might have been fatal in the past to live full lives and have children. Some argue this means natural selection has slowed, but others suggest it has only shifted. Instead of survival of the fittest hunter, we now live in a world of survival of the most adaptable to complex social and technological environments. The ability to learn, cooperate, and navigate digital networks may be every bit as important today. As spear-throwing accuracy was in the Ice Age. One of the fascinating frontiers of modern evolution is our interaction with digital life. Our brains evolved to process spoken language, gestures, and social cues in small groups. Yet we now live in an environment of screens, constant notifications, and global connectivity. While the genetic response to this new world may not yet be clear, the cultural response is profound. Children growing up immersed in technology develop different cognitive patterns, attention spans, and ways of interacting over long time scales. If these patterns persist, They could influence the direction of human evolution itself. The digital realm may be as transformative as the savannah once was, an entirely new environment shaping how our species survives and thrives. Another area where evolution is ongoing is in reproduction. Global migration and the mixing of populations are blending once isolated gene pools. This genetic diversity may provide resilience against future challenges, offering a broader toolkit of traits for adaptation. Meanwhile, reproductive technologies and cultural choices are altering who passes on their genes and when. Delayed parenthood, in vitro fertilization, and other interventions all interact with natural selection in complex ways, adding new layers to the story of how humans evolve. Some researchers also point to physical changes already underway. Data suggests that human jaws are becoming smaller, partly due to softer diets and modern food processing. Wisdom teeth, once useful for chewing tough plants, are now often impacted or missing entirely. Similarly, some studies suggest that the human skeleton is becoming lighter as lifestyles involve less physical strain. These are subtle changes, barely perceptible across a single lifetime, but they reflect the continuing dialogue between environment and anatomy. Where then might humans be headed? It is tempting to imagine dramatic transformations, taller, thinner bodies adapted to heat, or perhaps shorter, more compact forms if the climate cools. Some speculate about humans with enhanced resistance to disease, or with brains subtly shaped by the demands of technology and social networks. Others point to the possibility of gene editing, where evolution may no longer be entirely natural, but directed by choice. In that scenario, the line between biology and culture blurs even further, and humanity becomes both the subject and the author of its own evolutionary path. One thing is certain: evolution is not a story with an end point. There is no final form, no perfect version of humanity waiting to be revealed. Evolution is simply change guided by the shifting pressures of environment, culture, and chance. Just as our ancestors could never have predicted laptops or skyscrapers, we cannot know what traits will prove vital in the centuries to come. The quiet continuation of evolution reminds us that we are not fixed creatures, but part of a living process. Our bodies and minds are not only the products of the past, but also the seeds of the future. Lactose tolerance, disease resistance, and digital adaptation are not separate curiosities. They are chapters in the same story that once included bipedalism, fire, and the shaping of stone tools. We are still evolving as we always have been, and perhaps the most striking thought of all is this: the humans of tomorrow will look back at us the way we look at Neanderthals or Australopithecines, as earlier versions still in the middle of the journey. Evolution is never finished. It continues quietly, reshaping us in ways we may barely notice, until one day those changes become the defining traits of a new humanity. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans were just one species among many. We walked the same paths as Neanderthals, crossed rivers where Denisovans once lived, and lived in landscapes shaped by ice, fire, and shifting forests. The story of evolution is not a clean straight line leading to us, but a branching tree full of experiments, cousins, and paths that ended too soon. Yet somehow, through chance, adaptability, and cooperation, Homo sapiens emerged as the lineage that endured. Looking back, it is humbling to see how fragile the journey really was. A few changes in climate, a few lost migrations, or a few different turns in fortune might have led to a very different outcome. Our bodies tell this story in every joint and curve: the strain of upright walking, the challenge of childbirth, the compromise of back pain, the vulnerability of our infants. Our DNA tells it too, carrying fragments of Neanderthals and Denisovans, reminders that we are not a species apart, but a blend of many. Even our cultures, our myths, our languages all echo the same truth. Humanity is not a finished design, but an unfolding process. Evolution is often imagined as something ancient, completed long ago. But in truth, it never ended. It is as present today as it was in the age of stone tools and mammoth hunts. Lactose tolerance, disease resistance, even the subtle ways we adapt to digital life. These are threads of evolution still being woven. Humanity continues to change quietly in ways we may not notice until generations have passed. We're not standing still, but moving as life always does toward possibilities we cannot yet see. What makes the story of Homo sapiens remarkable is not that we're perfect, but that we are flexible. Where other species specialized, we adapted. We endured ice ages and deserts, invented tools, language, and art, and built settlements that turned into civilizations. Along the way, we learned to depend one on each other. Cooperation became our survival strategy, and imagination became our greatest tool. From ochre marks on cave walls to satellites orbiting the Earth, our creativity has carried us through. And yet for all our progress, we remain deeply connected to the past. When we run long distances, we show Homo erectus on the savannah. When we tell stories, we follow in the footsteps of those who painted animals and cave walls. When we look after the sick or mourn the dead, we continue practices first seen among Neanderthals. Evolution is not just about bodies and bones. It is about behaviors, ideas, and emotions that stretch across time. The threads of our ancestors are still woven through our daily lives, even if we rarely notice them. To reflect on this journey is to recognize both our vulnerability and our resilience. We are fragile animals, soft-skinned and slow compared to many predators. And yet we're also astonishingly adaptable, able to live in jungles, tundras, mountains, and cities. Evolution did not make us the strongest or the fastest, but it gave us minds capable of imagining futures, of creating meaning, of dreaming. In that sense, the story of humanity is as much about imagination as survival. The future of this story is still unwritten. Just as no Neanderthal could have pictured skyscrapers or spacecraft, we cannot imagine the full shape of the humans to come. Evolution may continue quietly, reshaping us in response to climate, disease, and technology. Or perhaps through science, we will guide it ourselves, altering our genes and choosing our future paths. Whatever comes, the thread of change will remain unbroken, continuing the story that began with primates in the trees. There is something deeply calming in this perspective. Evolution is not a march toward perfection, but a rhythm of adaptation and endurance. It reminds us that being human has always meant navigating uncertainty with creativity and connection. It tells us that survival is not about being flawless, but about being flexible. And it reassures us that whatever challenges lie ahead, we carry within us the legacy of countless generations who faced their own challenges and endured. The story of Homo sapiens is still being written, and tonight you've drifted through its earliest chapters. From the first tentative steps out of the forests, to the footprints across ancient ash, to the flickering firelight of the first communal gatherings. We have followed the arc of a species, learning, adapting, and imagining. And just as our ancestors looked to the horizon, unsure of what lay ahead, we too stand at the edge of the unknown, carrying their resilience within us. From the first primates who clung to branches in the aftermath of the dinosaurs, to the hunter-gatherers who painted their lives in ochre and firelight, the story of humanity has been one of slow, patient change. We are not the product of a single leap, nor the outcome of a neat, straight line, but the descendants of a tangled web of species, experiments, and adaptations. Every bone in our bodies and every thought in our minds carries echoes of that journey. Evolution is not just a tale of ancient fossils in dusty museum cases. It is alive within us, shaping the curve of our spine, the strength of our stride, the power of our imagination. Looking back, what stands out is not how inevitable Homo sapiens was, but how precarious. At countless points, survival was uncertain. A shift in climate, the collapse of prey herds, or the arrival of disease could have ended our story before it truly began. Other human species, the Neanderthals, the Denis, and earlier branches, like Homo habilis and Homo erectus, remind us that we were never alone. For much of prehistory, the world was shared, full of cousins and companions who were intelligent, resourceful, and resilient in their own ways. Yet, one by one, they disappeared, leaving us as the sole survivors of a once diverse family. Even so, their legacy has not vanished. It remains in our DNA, in our culture, and in the enduring mystery of what it means to be human. Our survival was not guaranteed by strength or speed. Instead, it was adaptability that set us apart. Bipedalism freed our hands to carry tools and children, while long legs made us walkers and runners across continents. Larger brains gave us the capacity for imagination and language, but they also demanded cooperation. For raising helpless infants required care, and childbirth required support. Social bonds, empathy, and the ability to share knowledge became as crucial to survival as stone blades and fire. In every chapter of our story, community has been our lifeline. And then there was imagination. Cave paintings in Lascaux, the Venus, figurines of Ice Age Europe, and the monumental pillars of Göbekli Tepe show that humans did not live by bread and meat alone. We dreamed, we symbolized, we created meaning beyond survival. Art, ritual, and language became tools of cohesion, binding groups together with shared stories. Through them, humans discovered not only how to endure, but how to belong. Domestication marked another turning point. With crops and herds, humans entered into partnerships with nature that changed both sides forever. Wheat, maize, and rice were reshaped by our hands, just as our bodies and societies were reshaped by dependence on them. Dogs, cattle, and goats became companions and resources, blurring the line between wild and tame. Agriculture brought surplus, surplus brought settlements, and settlements eventually grew into civilizations. Yet all of it was built on the quiet, patient rhythm of evolution, a gradual reshaping of genes, landscapes, and cultures over countless generations. Even now, evolution has not ceased. Lactose tolerance spread only in the last few thousand years. Genetic resistance to diseases such as malaria shows how pathogens and people shape one another in a constant dance. Our skeletons grow lighter as lifestyles shift. Our jaws adapt to new diets. And in the digital age, we have created environments no savanna-dwelling ancestor could have imagined. The story is still unfolding quietly, almost invisibly, but just as powerfully as before. It is easy to imagine evolution as a march toward perfection, but in truth, it is a story of compromises. Walking upright gave us endurance, but also back pain. Larger brains gave us imagination, but also dangerous childbirth. Farming gave us stability, but also narrower diets and disease. We are not flawless products of nature. We are resilient improvisers shaped by challenges and adapted to endure. Our very imperfections remind us that survival does not belong to the strongest, but to the most flexible. To reflect on this journey is to feel both humility and wonder. We are latecomers in Earth's vast history, fragile animals who managed to carve a place in every environment. And yet, in less than a blink of geological time, we have painted caves, built cities, and reached into space. None of this was inevitable. It was the result of countless tiny changes, each one carried forward by generations who adapted, endured, and imagined. The history of Homo sapiens is not over. It is being written, now in our bodies, our cultures, and our choices. Future generations will inherit not only your DNA, but also the world we leave behind. A world we're still shaping with every act of creativity and every decision of survival. Just as no Neanderthal could have imagined satellites orbiting Earth, we cannot know what forms humanity will take tens of thousands of years from now. But we can be certain of this. Evolution will continue patiently, quietly, always moving forward. And so, as night falls and the mind grows still, the story comes full circle. From the rustle of leaves in ancient forests to the Viate gatherings, of hunter-gatherers to the quiet hum of modern life, We're all part of the same unfolding tale. Evolution has carried us this far, and it will carry us still further in ways we can only begin to dream. The story of Homo sapiens is still being written, and tonight you've drifted through its earliest chapters. May these echoes of our long journey bring you calm. May they remind you of the resilience woven into your very being, and may they guide you gently into rest. Sleep peacefully, for tomorrow is simply the next page in the great unfolding of humanity's story.